The moon shines brightly and illuminates the black water of the ocean. Thick fog descends on it in ominous silence. Then, it's suddenly broken by the creaking of wooden boards, followed by a rippling of the waves. Through the fog, you see the outline of an old, large ship. Its hull is rusty, and a strange cold is coming from it. But the most unsettling thing is that there's no one on the deck. The ship sails without a crew. No, this isn't a mythical Flying Dutchman, but a very real ghost ship. September 2nd, 2019. The British Royal Navy's ice patrol ship, called the HMS Protector, sails through the calm waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The time is 11 p.m. Some of the ship's crew are on deck, while others are sleeping in their cabins. The captain steers the ship and looks straight at the horizon. The sky is lit up by an orange twilight, and clouds float in the distance. Suddenly, against this beautiful landscape, one of the sailors notices the black silhouette of an unknown ship. The captain slows down and steers the ship a little closer to the mysterious vessel. This is an old cargo ship, 250 feet long. Attempts to contact the crew members lead to nothing. It seems the unknown boat is floating in the ocean by itself. There's no one on board, at least, no one alive. The deck of the ship creaks from rocking on the waves. The sun sinks below the horizon, and it gets dark. The ship looks terrifying. British sailors don't dare to climb on that strange deck. They take a photo, post it on the internet, and sail away. Many people on the internet will assume the sailors met a real ghost ship. 5 months later, we're in the village of Ballycotton in County Cork, Ireland. A local leaves the house early in the morning to go for a daily run. Music in his headphones, fresh cool air, and a scenic route are ideal conditions for a good workout. The jogger runs along the road on the coast of the Celtic Sea. There was a strong storm last night, and now the sea looks calm. The man runs along the top of a low cliff and notices a huge vessel. An old rusty cargo ship 250 feet long lies on the beach, right among the rocks. No people on board. It seems the ship has been here for ages, but the local is sure this vessel wasn't here yesterday. A little later, it turns out this is the same ship that the sailors from the HMS Protector saw 5 months ago, thousands of miles from this place. The cargo ship, called the Alta, was built in 1976. Nobody knows who used it all this time and for what purposes. It's only known that in 2017, the ship was purchased by a new owner and marked with the flag of Tanzania. It's important to say that almost all cargo ships are equipped with AIS, Automatic Identification System, which is needed to track ship movements in the ocean. Since 2015, something strange started happening with the Alta's AIS. The ship disappeared from the satellites, then reappeared again. Over the past few years, this ship had changed several names and flags. It's not surprising that its AIS shut off and turned on numerous times. It's said that some of those who disable AIS on their ships do so to hide outlaw activities. The ship's captain, whoever it was, clearly didn't want to show the Alta's movements. As AIS showed in 2017, the ship had sailed near Greek port cities. The Alta made 12 stops in 3 such cities in different parts of Greece. Then, the AIS signal disappeared, and 10 months later, the Alta reappeared near the northern coast of Africa, 1,200 miles from Greece. In September of 2018, the ship was sailing about 1,400 miles southeast of Bermuda, and at that time, the crew members started having problems. There were 10 people on board the Alta. On September 19th, the ship's engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The nearest shore was very far away. The ship began to drift. As days passed, the crew couldn't fix the vessel. Food supplies were running low. The crew started to panic and tried to contact someone. The situation got worse as a strong hurricane was approaching the place where the ship broke down. crew members contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. On October 2nd, a helicopter headed towards the ship. Food and water were unloaded on the Alta. This was enough for the crew to bide their time for several days. About a week later, a rescue boat sailed about 1,500 miles to reach the Alta and help the stranded sailors. Shortly before the start of the hurricane, American rescuers succeeded. The entire crew of the wrecked ship was taken to Puerto Rico. The Alta remained drifting in the ocean. After a while, another ship arrived to tow it to the coast of Guyana. Then, something went wrong again. The ship was hijacked. Who did it and why remains a mystery to this day. But then, for some unknown reason, the thieves decided to abandon the ship and left it to drift in the ocean. For almost a year, the ship's location couldn't be tracked. Then, in September 2019, the vessel was found by the British Royal Navy. How the Alta was able to cover the distance across the Atlantic and wash up on the coast of Ireland is unknown. An investigation has been launched in Ireland. It's necessary to identify the owner of the vessel and find a responsible person to take on the task of towing it. But no one has since been found. Once, an unknown person called the Irish authorities and introduced themselves as the owner of the ship, but didn't provide any evidence. Several barrels of oil were found on board the Alta. To dismantle the ship, the Irish authorities will need to spend about 10 million euros. Local residents are annoyed by the wreck too. Corroding metal is bad for the environment, and kids have already snuck on board and posted a video on the internet from inside the abandoned ship. The further fate of the Alta remains unresolved. It's still lying there. That ship sailed in the ocean for just 2 years. Now imagine if some other managed to drift for 38. In all that time, no one could catch this ship, and people still seek it. That vessel is called the SS Bechimo. It was a merchant ship owned by a Canadian trading company. In 1931, the ship got stuck in ice off the coast of Alaska. A strong snowstorm began. The team waited a week for it to end, but the storm only intensified. One day, the weather improved a bit, and part of the team was evacuated to the nearest city. Another part of the crew, with the captain, set up camp near the ship. The storm started again and didn't stop for a long time. The blizzard was so heavy that the ship's captain couldn't see beyond his arm's reach. Finally, when the storm was over, the captain saw that the ship simply vanished. He decided the Bechimo sank during the storm. A week later, the ship was found, drifting near the place where it was lost. The hull of the ship was damaged so badly that it was unsafe to sail on it. The captain decided to abandon the ship. However, it didn't sink. For the next 38 years, it was drifting at various points along the Alaskan coast. Several times, people climbed on the ship, including native Alaskan residents and a group of researchers. Attempts to save the vessel from the sea ended in failure. The salvage operations were hampered by drifting ice and bad weather. The last time it was seen was in 1969. The ship was frozen and blocked by the ice. In 2006, the government created a special project to find the Bechimo. However, in all these years, the ship still hasn't been found. Its fate is unknown. It's likely that the ship has finally found peace and is now lying on the seabed of the Chukchi Sea.
Far out in the open sea on a perfectly calm day, a dot appears on the horizon. It grows in size as it gets closer, and soon you can see it's a ship. But when you look at it through the spyglass, chills go down your spine. The vessel is in perfect condition and its cargo is on board, but it's completely devoid of people, drifting listlessly along the current. That was what the captain of the Ellen Austin saw in 1881, and what brought his crew so many sorrows. In December of the previous year, the Ellen Austin, a big 210-foot-long ship, left the port of Liverpool to make its trip to New York. The ship was carrying a load of people hoping to find a better life in the New World. Captain A.J. Griffin took the vessel due southwest for a shorter voyage, and a few weeks into 1881, they found themselves north of the Sargasso Sea, known for its lack of winds and strong circling currents. Ships that got caught in those could lose control and keep on drifting in circles until they were dragged into the center. From there, they'd be incredibly lucky to get back past the currents, but more often than not, they stayed in the desolate desert of the sea forever. Worse still, the area belonged to the notorious Bermuda Triangle, which was already known to take down ships and make them disappear without a trace. The ship's crew were nervous, afraid of being in such a dangerous area so close to a sea that could bring them to a standstill. And ominously, some of the Sargasso Sea's calm must have escaped it, because the Ellen Austin lost its speed one day and fell adrift without the winds. It was fine, though. They had ample provisions and were still on schedule. Captain Griffin was walking around his ship, giving orders in a voice full of calm authority, and both his crew and passengers trusted him completely. But then, the lookout shouted from above that a ship was in sight. And indeed, when the captain looked in the direction the man was pointing, he saw a small schooner moving slowly into view and towards the Ellen Austin. As it came closer, it became apparent that the way the strange vessel moved wasn't right. The captain frowned and examined it through his spyglass. The schooner was untouched, but eerily silent. There wasn't a single soul on board. Derelict ships weren't that rare in the Atlantic at the time, but neither were pirates. Captain Griffin decided to wait and watch. After 2 days, the schooner was as quiet as always, and Captain finally thought it was fine to move in. He took a small team of sailors and boarded the stranded ship. There was nobody there indeed, but luck seemed to be on Griffin's side. The precious cargo of mahogany wood was still in the holds. The captain returned to the Ellen Austin and ordered his select men to take the smaller ship along to New York. The crew's spirits arose with the prospect of riches awaiting them upon arrival. When the winds blew strong again, the Ellen Austin continued its voyage, with the unnamed vessel tagging along. But after a couple of days, the ships were caught in a powerful storm and got separated. The wind, rain, and waves beat them for several days in a row. When the weather finally cleared, Captain Griffin ordered to find the schooner. They searched for another day until they finally found it adrift, way off the course. Griffin hailed his men on board the smaller ship, but no one answered. A party of sailors went to investigate and returned with their faces white with fear. The whole prize crew went missing in the storm. The captain wasn't one to lose such a valuable find, though, and ordered another team to take control of the schooner. Reluctantly, the sailors obeyed, and the two ships continued their voyage. They agreed to stay as close as possible to one another and ring their bells at set intervals at night to let each other know they were fine. Several nights went all right, with bells ringing reassuringly every hour. But one day, a thick blanket of fog fell on the sea and almost completely blocked their vision. The ships went on regardless and started sounding their bells earlier. When night came, the fog was still there, but the bells were the sound of life. Until they stopped. Captain Griffin rang the bell once, then twice. No answer. The crew lit the fires and looked out into the sea intently, but the fog hadn't lifted, and they couldn't see a thing in the swirling abyss beyond the ship's board. Nobody could sleep that night, and they waited in silence until the break of dawn. The first rays of sun made the fog slowly disperse, and the whole crew went to the edge of the deck with heavy hearts. There was still hope in them, until the last strands of the mist went away, revealing a vast, calm, and most importantly, empty ocean. The nameless schooner was gone, and so was the second team of the Ellen Austin sailors. The ship sailed the rest of the way to New York in grave silence. Once it arrived at the port, the passengers were only too happy to leave the vessel, and no one so much as turned their head as a goodbye. That was the ship's last voyage as the Ellen Austin. That same year, It was sold to a German shipping company and renamed Meta. No one ever found the derelict schooner or the sailors that went missing with it. And that would probably be the end of this mysterious and unresolved story, if it held at least a little bit of the truth. In reality, none of the enigmatic things in the narrative actually happened. The Ellen Austin did indeed leave Liverpool and headed southwest to New York, and its captain was really A.J. Griffin, taking people to the American continent. But from here, the story falls apart. First of all, the ship went way too far to the north to pass the Sargasso Sea so closely. There was simply no reason to make a detour so broad. Even though the westerly winds were strong, it was still faster to take them head-on than to go in a southerly direction. So the Ellen Austin was probably nowhere near the Sargasso Sea and the Bermuda Triangle. Secondly, the triangle itself has been proven time and again to be nothing but a work of fiction. In fact, it gained popularity in the middle of the 20th century, while nobody even thought of drawing a triangle in the Bermuda area before that. The mystery was popularized by science fiction writers and became a common myth, while no serious research proved it any more dangerous than other parts of the world's ocean. So the crew of the Ellen Austin weren't even aware of the Bermuda Triangle back then, let alone afraid of it. Thirdly, the whole story was told and retold by magazines and mystery-loving personalities with ever-changing details. It first appeared in a newspaper in 1906 and already had the date wrong. The article said the voyage took place in 1891 instead of 1881. Later, the story resurfaced in 1935 on the radio with the wrong name of the captain. It was Baker, not Griffin. The date was also off, saying the trip was taken in August 1881, when the Ellen Austin was already renamed Meta. The legend grew upon with other strange details, such as the ship's route from London to Newfoundland, which was never the case. But the final debunking came from the archives of Lloyd's of London, the marine insurance market that keeps all logs of trade and emigration ship routes. The documents there say that on February 1881, the Ellen Austin completed its cross-Atlantic voyage to New York without incident. Captain A.J. Griffin offboarded the ship with all his crew hale and hearty and declared no loss of hands during the trip. The voyage took over 2 months because the ship had to fight strong westerly winds pushing it back towards Britain. The crew reported no strange encounters on the way, and the whole thing was as boring as could be. And even the passengers must have been smiling when they stepped on the American soil at last, unaware of the phony baloney story they were about to be a part of. The voyage started just like any other. The cargo ship SS Cotopaxi is making another journey to Havana, Cuba, to deliver coal. It's November 29, 1925. For Captain Meyer and his crew, leaving Charleston Port, South Carolina, it will be the last trip the ship ever makes. Its route ran through the Bermuda Triangle. 2 days into the trip, the Cotopaxi sent out a distress signal. It had got caught up in a strong tropical storm and turned over on its side. The wind was very strong and there was powerful lightning as well. Rain gradually filled the ship's hold. Then there was a bright white flash, and the ship disappeared without a trace. Later, its wreckage was found in the Gobi Desert, which is in a completely different part of the world. All 32 crew members, including the captain, were missing. Of course, the part about the Gobi Desert is fictional. For one of his movies, Steven Spielberg came up with the idea that the ship was moved there by aliens. Still, in real life, the ship was never found, and its crew really did disappear. It was officially declared missing a month afterward, and nobody could find the wreck. It seems like a classic case of mysterious things going on in the Bermuda Triangle. But most mysteries are solved sooner or later. In 2020, the Cotopaxi was found. A man named Michael Barnett had moved to Florida to study shipwrecks off the coast. One wreck in particular really caught his attention. It was much larger than the others, and the locals called it the Bear Wreck. It was about 40 miles from St. Augustine in northern Florida, but no one had ever managed to identify the rusty hull. So Michael started to do some detective work. He measured the size of the shipwreck and started working through all the information he could find. He researched hundreds of old newspapers, leafed through insurance records, and looked at artifacts found on the wreck. After hundreds of hours of hard work, Michael was sure it was the Cotopaxi. But a few years before, there had been a rumor that the same ship had been found off the coast of Cuba. The Coast Guard found the wreck of a cargo ship about the same size that looked a lot like the one lost in 1925. Michael was sure they were wrong, so he teamed up with some science journalists and kept investigating. Soon they discovered something that seemed to confirm Michael's belief. Divers found brass valves with the letters SV on them in the wreckage of the ship. Michael suggested these initials referred to Scott Valve Manufacturing Company. The headquarters of this company was in Michigan, not far from where the Cotopaxi had been built. The company had probably supplied parts for the Cotopaxi. So the puzzle seemed to be solved. The Bear wreck was really the missing cargo ship. But Michael still needed to work out why the ship had sunk. Did something mysterious really happen to the Cotopaxi in the Bermuda Triangle? Later, Michael found the testimony of the ship's carpenter among some old papers. The carpenter claimed that the hatches covering the coal on the ship had been in a terrible condition before it sank. Repair work on the covers wasn't finished before the crew got the order to sail to Cuba. So if the hatch covers were still broken during the trip, water could have easily gotten on board. This water probably flooded the hole during the tropical storm. This was the real reason why the Cotopaxi went down. There was really nothing mysterious about it. It was just a mistake made by ordinary people. But this is just one example out of dozens or even hundreds where ships and planes have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. We still can't explain some of these incidents. It seems like there really is something weird going on there. One of these strange events happened in 1948. A passenger jet was headed for Miami from San Juan, Puerto Rico. It disappeared in the same area as the Cotopaxi. The 32 people on board vanished without a trace. The weather was clear throughout the flight, but experts think that when the plane was about 50 miles from the coast, it could have been hit by a strong wind that knocked it off course. Years later, a similar plane was found in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, but because no one could work out the registration, it was impossible to say for sure if it was the same one. Something even stranger occurred not long before, in 1945. 5 planes went missing all at the same time. Some trainee pilots were practicing their navigation skills. But when they'd finished, it seems they couldn't find their way back home and disappeared. Many people assume they just ran out of fuel. This seems likely, but still, the circumstances were really strange. The trainees were being supervised by an experienced pilot who had 2,500 hours of flight time. He would never have let a group of newbie pilots get that far away from their base. Even now, people still debate what could have happened. Some insist the pilots ran into something supernatural out there in the Bermuda Triangle. But who knows? And here's another freaky thing that happened there which no expert has been able to explain. Time travel. In 1970, Bruce Gernon was flying a plane from Andros Island to the Florida coast. When he was at 11,500 feet, a giant cloud appeared in front of him. It kept getting bigger and bigger, and he had no choice but to fly through it. As soon as he did, the plane was surrounded by darkness. It was as if the day had turned to night in a split second. Suddenly, Bruce began to see white flashes of light around him. They were so bright that they lit up the entire sky. But they weren't lightning bolts, although he couldn't really explain what they were. The plane continued through the strange cloud for almost a half an hour. Bruce noticed that the cloud changed shape during this time. The space around the plane turned into a tunnel. Then the tunnel started narrowing. Bruce became really tense as he tried to cope with the plane's controls. All his instruments and navigation equipment were going crazy, and the electronics stopped working. Then, a white light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Just like in the movies, the plane escaped the closing cloud tunnel at the very last second. Everything was fine, but now Bruce found himself in some white fog. He had no idea where he was. Then he managed to contact ground control. He was shocked when he learned that his plane was already in the airspace above Miami. It seemed that something impossible had happened. Bruce was meant to cover a distance of about 250 miles during the flight. This usually took 1.5 hours, but he had managed it in just 47 minutes, almost 2 times faster than normal. When Bruce landed, he went to check the amount of fuel left in the tank. It turned out he'd used up a lot less than the normal amount of fuel as well. Could there be a logical explanation for the time-traveling plane? Well, records show that a large number of sunspots were detected on the surface of the sun that day, and there was a strong solar wind. This could easily have made the electronics and devices on the plane go crazy. But what about the mysterious cloud? The Florida coast is a place where 2 large air currents meet. One has a high pressure and the other is a low pressure one. This causes a lot of storm clouds in the area. But people still debate how Bruce was able to cover the distance so quickly. Some people say that some kind of mysterious dark energy was involved. Others say it was a gravitational anomaly that curves space and time. Others think that Bruce is just a fraud. We still don't know the truth. So, is there really something supernatural about the Bermuda Triangle? Or is it all just coincidences and made-up stories? The truth is that no more planes and ships disappear in the Bermuda Triangle than anywhere else in the world.
Nearly 140 years ago, some fishermen pulled pieces of a ship from Lake Michigan. But where was the rest of it? From that moment on, hunters spent years searching for the ghost ship. By the 1970s, the hunt reached a new level. One with a $1,000 reward offered to anyone who could find it. Still, nothing. It was as if the vessel had simply vanished into thin air. That is, until now. Researchers have finally found the shipwreck off the coast of Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin. The ship called the F.J. King disappeared back in 1886. At that time, this 140-foot-long vessel had a very important job: transporting grain. Now you might think, grain? Really? That's it? Okay, sure, it's not like the ship was loaded with tons of gold or jewels. But we have to see the bigger picture. At that time, Wisconsin was known as America's breadbasket. The state produced huge amounts of food, especially wheat. In fact, about 1/6 of the nation's wheat was being harvested there. Farming was booming, and that of course meant big money. The F.J. King was part of that golden era.
For about 19 years, it successfully carried and traded grain and iron ore through the Welland Canal. That is, until September 15th, 1886. That day, the crew were on their journey to carry iron ore from Michigan to Chicago. It was supposed to be just another routine trip, but they were caught in a powerful storm. The conditions were brutal, with waves nearly 10 feet high. The crew fought desperately to get the water out and keep the ship afloat, but the waves were too strong. They kept coming, one after another. The men worked hard until they couldn't go on anymore. The waves were splitting the ship's seams. At this point, a catastrophe was inevitable. So Captain William Griffin gave the order, "Abandon ship." They had no choice but to get out. The men grabbed their belongings as fast as they could and climbed into the ship's small yawl boat. It was 2 a.m. Everything around them was dark. As they tried to get closer to shore, the F.J. King went down, bow first. And then suddenly, boom! The crew watched in shock as the ship's stern deckhouse blew off, sending the captain's papers 50 feet into the air. They stayed in the small boat until they were picked up by a passing schooner called La Petite. The crew took them to Bailey's Harbor, and moments later, Captain Griffin filed a wreck report. That's when the real mystery began. In his report, the captain said the ship had gone down about 5 miles off the shore of Lake Michigan. But that was just what he thought. I mean, it wasn't based on any instruments, readings, or anything like that. It was just what he remembered from that night. A week later, though, a local lighthouse keeper spotted the masts of a schooner sticking out of the water, much closer to shore. He reported it to a nearby newspaper, and that's when people really started asking questions. Could that be the FJ King? Even though they had a solid lead, it didn't take them anywhere. No one could find the boat. Days passed, then months, then years, until 2025. That's when an investigator named Brendan Baylod decided enough was enough. He gathered a team of about 20 scientists and historians to finally track down this historic shipwreck. They dug through hundreds of original documents about the ship and the day it went down, piecing together clues and narrowing down the area where it might be. Many experts were like, "Man, just let it go." And to be fair, they had every reason to feel discouraged. After all, that whole area had already been searched over and over. There was just no way the ship could still be out there. But Bayod didn't give up. Okay, truth is, he also thought it was a long shot. But working to find the ghost ship had other perks. His team wanted to get some hands-on experience with a brand new super advanced sonar. With that in mind, they set out on their mission, heading to Lake Michigan on June 28th. Okay, great. But where do you even start? First, Bayod had to clear something up. Back when the wreck happened, who was actually telling the truth about the ship's location? The captain or the lighthouse keeper? Getting that answer would point them in the right direction. Then, Bayod thought about something that might have already crossed your mind. How could the captain really know where they were? It was pitch black. He'd just been struggling to keep his ship afloat. He couldn't see much. He was exhausted and probably hungry. He definitely wasn't thinking straight. That's when the investigator realized the lighthouse keeper's directions were probably more accurate. Thankfully, he found the newspaper article from 1886. You know, the one I mentioned earlier, where the lighthouse keeper gave a more specific detail about where he'd last seen the ship's masts. What the investigator did next was draw a 2-square-mile grid around that location, and the team decided to map the lake bottom inside that grid using their fancy tech. So, there they were, aboard the Shoreline, a tour boat that usually carries sightseers along the peninsula. But that day, they didn't really expect to find anything. Their only goal that afternoon was to test their new side-scan sonar, one with much greater capability than the previous model the crew had been using. But then, after about 2 hours of searching, something strange happened. The sonar was sending out sound waves to map the dark floor of Lake Michigan when it started to act a little differently. And as the images began to stitch together, they revealed a shape that was impossible to mistake. A ship. Bingo. They'd found it. Turns out the wreck was less than half a mile from where the lighthouse keeper had said it would be. At this point, some of the crew had to pinch each other. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were shocked, not only because they'd found the ship so quickly, but also because of how well it was preserved. You see, the investigators were hopeful, but they also thought the ship would be shattered into pieces. After all, it had been carrying iron ore, and the weight of all that metal could have torn it apart even more. But no. To everyone's surprise, the hull was almost completely intact. Sure, the front right side was crushed, but the rest of it was pretty much there. The investigators even found the crew's belongings and kitchenware scattered across the lake bottom. Once they got over the shock, they called in archaeologists to examine the site and create a three-dimensional model of the wreck. This is the 5th major shipwreck Bayod and his team have found in the last 3 years, but the truth is, this region is full of mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. The FJ King is just one of around 6,000 ships that were damaged or destroyed in incidents across the Great Lakes during the 1800s. And it's estimated that hundreds of these wrecks still remain hidden at the bottom of Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Thankfully, discoveries like this one could become more and more common. In fact, more shipwrecks are being found today than at any other time in history. Advances in technology have made scanning the lake floor less expensive and more accessible, not just for professionals, but for amateurs too. And the profile of these modern-day shipwreck hunters has changed. Now, they're more often searching for wrecks for their historical value, not just to find treasure. Another project that could help uncover even more wrecks in the Great Lakes is called Lakebed 2030. It could change everything, as its goal is to map the entire lake floor. And right now, only about 15% has been explored. That means the Great Lakes might still be hiding their biggest secrets, and that, at the very least, is super exciting.
The Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia. The Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia.
Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia.
Costa Concordia.
The Costa Concordia disaster is a tragedy that took dozens of lives, yet went down as completely avoidable and should have never happened. The disaster was caused by the captain going off course, and it wasn't to dodge an iceberg or fix an engine issue. He wanted to pull a flashy stunt called a sail-by salute. That's when a massive cruise ship sails way too close to shore so people on land can wave. Unfortunately, it became the most catastrophic high in history, claiming 32 lives. It was 2012. Over 4,000 people boarded the Costa Concordia for a chill 7-day Mediterranean cruise. But Captain Francesco Schettino wasn't content with just following a safe, boring route. So on January 13th, after leaving Civitavecchia, Italy, he steered toward Giulio Island to pull off his grand salute. Did he have authorization? Nope. So he ordered the crew to change course, and it went something like, "Listen guys, let's head this way." But the helmsman heard "that way," and without a translator handy, the ship took the wrong turn straight into the rocks. There was a magic show going on when the lights suddenly went out. At first, people thought it was part of the act, but then came a horrendous, loud crash, and everyone started to panic. The ship rolled onto its side, and suddenly, it became impossible to access lifeboats. Some passengers had no choice but to jump into the cold sea and swim for land. And this wasn't just cold water, it was hypothermia cold, the kind that freezes your muscles and shuts down your arms and legs in minutes. And to make things worse, the ship hadn't even run an emergency drill, so it was total chaos. At some point, Captain Schettino abandoned the ship. Later, he blamed the disaster not on himself, but on the rocks. Yes, he literally said the rocks weren't marked on his charts, and that was the real problem. After the disaster, cruise lines tightened their safety rules, so now every passenger has to do a muster drill before any cruise ship even leaves port. A little late, but at least they finally figured that one out.
On December 19, more than 1,500 people perished.
Now, if you thought the Costa Concordia was bad, meet Dona Paz. This was chaos on a whole new level. So much so, it holds the world record for the largest maritime disaster ever in terms of lives lost. And if you're looking for someone to blame the must-see movie the captain chose to watch instead of, steering. Officially, this passenger ferry could carry about 1,500 people. But somehow, more than 4,000 ended up on board. It was basically a human sardine can on water. There weren't enough beds, so passengers slept in the hallways, on the decks, and sometimes 3 or 4 had to share one bunk. And to complete the disaster starter pack, rumor has it the ship didn't even have a working radio, and the life jackets were locked away. Oh, perfect. It was December 20th, 1987. The Dona Paz set off across the Tabla Strait in the Philippines. For hours, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, at about 10:30 that night, the ferry slammed into an oil tanker, the MT Vector. The problem is that Vector was carrying over 1,000 tons of gasoline. Yep, gasoline. So you see where this is going, right? After the collision, flames quickly spread to both ships and across the water around them. The captain, meanwhile, was in his bedroom watching a movie, and most of the crew was busy partying, which means nobody with real experience was even monitoring the ship when it crashed. So, when chaos broke out, even the crew panicked. Now, remember that whole women and children first code from Titanic? Here it was more like every man for himself. There were no orders, no evacuation plan, no leadership. Passengers were trapped with literally nowhere to run. Some were forced to jump off the ship, only to land in flaming waters. Others didn't even have time to react. Out of more than 4,000 people on board, only 25 survived. What we learned from this disaster is that, yes, there is a limit to how many people you can fit onto one ship. Afterward, the Philippine maritime industry finally enforced stricter safety standards and got a lot tougher about passenger limits. So no, you won't be sharing a bunk with a random stranger if you get on a ship there today. If the Danya Paz is known as Asia's Titanic, then the MV Lujula is Africa's version of it. In 2002, this ferry was supposed to make a trip from Zigancourt to Dakar. The Lujula was designed to carry about 580 passengers, but on the day of the disaster, it had more than 3 times that number on board. So, from the moment it left port, the ship was already leaning to one side. To escape the hot, overcrowded cabins, many passengers gathered on the upper deck, where students were chatting, playing cards, or flirting far from their parents' eyes. But when night fell, those life-is-good vibes disappeared fast. Dark clouds rolled in, and strong winds started rocking the ferry. As rain started pounding the Lujula's deck, hundreds of passengers rushed inside. Then the ship suddenly tilted hard to the left, and water came pouring in. The cargo hadn't been tied down properly, so it all slid to one side. Even a heavy generator broke loose, and suddenly everything went dark. Panic spread. People grabbed onto anything they could, railings, ropes, other passengers, but the ship tipped too far. Within minutes, the ferry capsized off the coast of Gambia. Most of the travelers were trapped inside. Only 64 people survived. Even after 2 decades, no one has truly been held accountable. Some blame bad weather, but others say it was human error, and honestly, there were plenty of those. Too many people on board, warnings ignored, and a painfully slow rescue. Let's just hope nothing that tragic ever happens again. The last disaster on our list changed South Korea. We're talking about the MV Sewol. It was April 2014. A ferry carrying 476 people, mostly high school students, was supposed to be a fun trip to Jeju Island. You know, selfies, snacks, sea breeze. But instead, 304 people never made it home. Those who did survive were mostly rescued by random fishing boats and commercial ships nearby, because the official rescue team took about 30 minutes to show up. That's right, 30 minutes. And that delay was just one piece of a much bigger mess. This was a completely preventable disaster from the start. The trip started out fine. Then, around 8:48 in the morning, the Sewol made a sharp turn and suddenly started tilting. But how sharp does a turn have to be to tip a massive ship like that? I mean, it's not a kayak. So clearly, something was already off. Turns out the Sewol had been modified, like a DIY job gone wrong. The owners wanted more room for cargo and passengers, so they rebuilt the upper decks and boosted its capacity by over 100 people. Oh, and on that day, the cargo wasn't even properly tied down. So yeah, it was a disaster waiting to happen. When the ship tilted, all that extra cargo slid to one side, making it lean even more. Water rushed in, flooding passenger compartments. The ferry started sinking within minutes. The passengers panicked, but then they heard the instructions over the intercom. Everyone, stay where you are. Don't move. It's safer in your cabins. Well, it wasn't. While hundreds of students followed orders and waited for help, the captain and several crew members escaped. Yeah, they got off the ship while teenagers were still trapped inside. When rescue teams finally arrived, it was too late for most. The Sewol disaster shocked an entire nation, but it also brought people together. It sparked new laws, better training, and a promise that no ship would ever sail that recklessly again.
This video's kinda serious. You won't find any jokes or memes here. It's possible that after watching it, you will change your mind about buying cruise ship tickets, because we're going to talk about people who went missing during such vacations. The cases opened by the police have not been solved. But before we look at some of these creepy stories, let's take a look at the statistics. Over the past 20 years, more than 200 passengers have disappeared on cruise ships. That's about 10 people a year. A small percentage compared to the millions of people who travel by ship every year. But every missing person is a family member. It's a whole life and a story. Most likely, there are many more such cases, but cruise companies sometimes don't want to spoil their reputation and talk about missing people, despite the fact that the U.S. Department of Transportation maintains an archive of such incidents. So, let's get to the first case, the disappearance of Amy Bradley. Some of you have probably seen the documentary about this girl who disappeared on board the Royal Caribbean Rhapsody of the Seas cruise ship. March 23, 1998. It was a luxurious trip to the Caribbean where Amy went with her family. Delicious food, beautiful views, cocktails, parties, and lots of amazing people. Amy was having a great time. But then, the morning of March 24th came, and the girl disappeared. On March 23rd, 23-year-old Amy was hanging out with her brother at the ship's nightclub. She met a musician from the cruise band, danced with him, and returned to the cabin around 3:30 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., her father saw Amy sleeping on the balcony. Half an hour later, the woman disappeared. More than 27 years have passed, and Amy Bradley has remained missing. Of course, the Coast Guard and the FBI carefully searched the ship and the water after the woman's family reported her missing, but the search was unsuccessful. Investigators questioned the musician Amy had been dancing with, but no charges were brought against him. There were no clues about what had happened to the girl or who might have been involved in her disappearance. The case became so well known that movie makers made a documentary about her. Thanks to the publicity, various theories began to appear about what could have happened to Amy. One of the most popular versions was that someone had abducted her for evil purposes. There were reports that someone had seen her in Barbados. In January 1999, more than 10 months after her disappearance, someone said they'd seen a girl who looked like Amy on the island of Curacao, and that she'd been asking for help. A girl's face that looked like Amy's appeared on the internet, but none of these clues led to solving the mystery. The FBI announced a reward of up to $25,000 for any information that would help find Amy. The search is still ongoing. Another story happened on May 12, 2005. 71-year-old Hu Pham and 67-year-old Hu Tran went on a Carnival Cruise Line's Destiny cruise in the Caribbean with their daughter and granddaughter. The vacation was going great until the elderly couple disappeared from the ship. The book that Hu Tran had been reading was found on one of the ship's decks. The crew members also found the couple's shoes and Tran's wallet. Even after a thorough search of the vessel, no other traces were found. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind when two old people disappear on a cruise ship is that they could have fallen overboard. The ship repeated its route to look for the couple at sea, but 13 hours of searching didn't help. The FBI joined the investigation. Detectives were trying to find who might have wished harm on Pham and Tran. They interviewed witnesses and many of the ship's passengers, but there were no suspects. There was no reason to think that a third person was involved in this mystery. The Pham and Tran family is still trying to solve this mystery, but all official investigations have stopped. Sometimes, a person disappears from the ship even though video cameras are installed. When the records show that no one has fallen overboard, but this person is nowhere to be found. This is exactly what happened to 20-year-old Blake Kepley. He was vacationing on the Holland America Line family cruise ship Oosterdam, which sailed through the waters of Alaska. In the early morning of July 22, 2011, he disappeared. The first version was that the guy had fallen overboard, but the company provided video files from the cameras. The records showed that no one had fallen overboard during the trip. It felt like Blake had just disappeared into thin air. The U.S. Coast Guard conducted a massive search of more than 350 miles of the ocean, but they found no trace. On July 23rd, one day after the disappearance, the search stopped. Blake's disappearance was noticed when he didn't disembark in Ketchikan. He may have passed unnoticed, but there's no evidence to support this version. In addition to cameras, the ship was equipped with a fall detection system, and it didn't detect any falls. The only tiny clue was a grainy photo from the cameras. It showed someone walking around the deck on the day when Blake Kepley disappeared. But it's hard to say who exactly was walking there because their face remained unseen. Since Blake's disappearance, his family has raised the issue of improving detection systems for people who fall overboard many times. The scariest thing in such situations is the unknown. The family can't let go of the missing person, and it torments them. Such detection systems could save relatives and loved ones from uncertainty. Almost all the stories about missing people on cruises are about passengers. But the next case concerns a crew member. 24-year-old Rebecca Corium worked on board the Disney Wonderliner as a youth activity coordinator. At 5:45 a.m. on March 22, 2011, upset Rebecca was talking on the phone in the crew lounge. She was captured on a video camera, and it was the last time Rebecca was seen alive. The crew conducted an inspection of the ship and the surrounding waters off the Pacific coast of Mexico, but the girl was never found. But the most mysterious thing about this story is that a few weeks after the disappearance, someone used Rebecca's credit card, but it's still unclear who did it. Many years have passed since the disappearance of this girl, and of course, during this time, there were theories about what had happened. The ship's captain suggested that Rebecca had been washed overboard by a large wave when she had been near the pool, but the woman's family rejected this idea. Others said that someone had wanted to harm her, but there's no confirmation of this version. Angelo Faliva worked as the first chef in the kitchen of the Coral Princess liner. On November 25, 2009, according to eyewitnesses, Angelo had a conflict with one of the employees. At about 8:15 p.m., Angelo was talking to two passengers in the dining room and then returned to the kitchen. Then someone saw him enter an elevator going down to the lower decks, which were open only to the liner's employees. No one has ever seen Angelo Faliva since. The situation is complicated by the fact that there were no cameras in the employees' areas. There were no cameras in the restaurants either, so there were no clues about what had happened to this man. "I'm going to the pool," 21-year-old Ariel Marion told her mother on the eve of her disappearance. After these words, her mom took a nap. When she woke up, her daughter was no longer on board. The search didn't reveal any details, but one of the passengers saw someone or something fall from the upper deck into the open sea. The girl was never found. The version of falling overboard is the most likely. It's June of 1857. A fierce storm slams into Gechen Bay, Australia, and rips apart a Dutch ship weighing 800 tons. Part of the crew tries to escape in a small boat, but only 9 of the 25 men on board survive. Now, many years later, researchers believe they've found this long-lost gold rush shipwreck. Yep, this ship is tied to one of the most dramatic high-stakes chapters in Australia's history. We're talking about the shipwreck of Koning Willem de Tweede, a vessel built back in 1840. This historic ship discovery is a big deal since it's now considered a real treasure in the world of underwater archaeology in Australia. Let me tell you why. By the middle of the 19th century, Dutch ships were carrying not just goods, but also people from Asia who were hoping to start a new life in Australia. And they were all chasing one thing: gold. Yep, the precious metal was discovered in Australia in 1851. Well, officially at least. It was actually found a few years earlier, but let's just say the authorities decided to keep that little detail away from the newspapers. Anyway, the big public discovery happened in 1851 when an Australian gold prospector named Edward Hammond Hargraves led an expedition in the New South Wales region, and he chose to tell everyone about his find. And just like that, the gold rush began. News spreads fast, so people start arriving from everywhere: Britain, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, and also from China. It's estimated by that time around 20,000 Chinese had made their way to the goldfields in Victoria. By 1861, about 3% of the Australian population had been born in the Asian country. Most of them came from the southern region of Guangdong, which was going through a really tough time back then. They'd been through it all: foreign invasions, massive floods, serious food shortages, you name it. Many people had lost everything. Their money was gone, their homes destroyed. They couldn't even afford a bite to eat. There was no clear way out of the poverty they were stuck in. But then, word started to spread. There was a goldfield somewhere in a distant British territory. They heard stories from people all over the world going there, that it was peaceful, full of opportunity, and that the land itself had everything you could need. It sounded like a dream. Before long, they began calling it Xinjin Shan, or New Gold Mountain. So, many scraped together what little they had left to reach Australia and start over. It was a shot at a better life, a chance to lift entire families out of poverty. But getting there wasn't cheap or easy. They had to travel in huge ships, and the average trip from Guangdong province took about 3 months to reach Sydney or Melbourne. At some point, Australian authorities decided to impose a tax on Chinese arrivals. Every passenger who disembarked at Victorian ports had to pay a £10 poll tax. So what do you think happened? The routes changed, of course. Instead of docking directly in Victoria, ships began stopping in Robe, a town in the southeastern part of South Australia. From there, people would walk about 250 miles all the way to the goldfields, just to avoid paying the tax. And this area is exactly where the Koning Willem de Tweede was discovered. Yep, our Dutch ship was found off the Robe coast, and it was one of many vessels that carried Chinese passengers to Australia. Now you can see why it's historically important, right? On the 16th of June, 1857, it brought around 400 people safely to shore so they could start their lives over. The ship itself didn't get a happy ending though. After dropping them off, it was supposed to continue its journey, but then a storm rolled in. So the ship had to drop anchor and wait it out in Geechin Bay. The weather kept getting worse. The anchor began to drag, and by the 13th of June, it was completely lost. The captain, called Hendrik Geisen, had to act fast. He made the call to beach the ship in hopes of saving both the vessel and his crew. But there was a problem. The ship ran aground on Long Beach, about 3 miles east of Robe, and it started breaking apart quickly in the rough seas. The rest of the story is tragic. 16 sailors drowned when one of the ship's small boats turned upside down. Only 9 men made it out alive. Captain Geisen stayed aboard the wreck. He eventually reached the shore by clinging to a cask. Thankfully, people who were on the beach managed to pull him out of the sea using a rope. A few months later, things from the wreck were sold to a local man in Robe named Jacob Chambers for £225, which was a pretty big amount of money back then. And that's because people were able to save a good amount of stuff from the wreck, like the bell, some doors, and wooden planks from the hull. Those doors and some of the timbers were later used to build the Caledonian Inn, a historic 2-story stone hotel that went up in 1859. As for the bell, it was supposedly used at Robe Primary School for over 100 years, but researchers aren't so sure about that part. What we do know is that most of the ship's remains were still missing, until now. After 3 years of hard work, a team affiliated with the Australian National Maritime Museum believes they have finally found the Koning Willem de Tweede. The project kicked off in April of 2022, and its main goal has been to search for, locate, and carry out an archaeological survey of the shipwreck's remains. To do that, they mainly used two tools: underwater metal detectors and a marine magnetometer, a device that detects changes in the magnetic field of the seafloor. Soon, this technology started picking up a bunch of anomalies in the area where the shipwreck was believed to be. And by anomalies, I mean weird signals. Clues that something might be buried under the seabed, probably hidden under layers of sand or mud. They believe those signals were coming from the iron parts of the ship's windlass. That's a big winch at the front of the ship used to pull up the anchors. Some of those pieces were sticking up slightly from the seabed, along with a partially exposed iron frame. They also spotted a well-preserved wooden plank underneath the windlass, which suggests that more of the ship's hull is still down there, just buried under the sand. So why do they feel confident that this wreck is the Koning Willem de Tweede? Well, basically for three reasons. First, the location. The spot where they picked up those signals lines up with historical accounts of where the ship went down. And it just so happens to be the only known shipwreck in that part of Long Beach. Second, the size. The cluster of magnetic signals roughly matches the ship's documented length, which is about 140 feet. Third and last reason, they found pieces of Chinese pottery from the 1800s right on the beach next to the site. When you put all those facts together, it basically screams Koning Willem de Tweede. That's why the team feels so confident they've finally discovered this historic ship. But even though they have good reasons to believe it, more research still needs to be done, so they're planning future visits to the site to keep monitoring things. The goal is to check the ship's condition and look for more parts of the hull or artifacts that might get uncovered as the seabed shifts over time. Let's hope they get lucky next time around.
Be careful, one. Save yourself! We're drowning!
Quick, check this out. Over 5,000 ships have been lost near this coastline. Pirate galleons, Civil War ironclads, even modern boats. They've all gone whoosh under the waves. This is a story about the famous graveyard of the Atlantic. For sailors, one of the most dangerous places on the planet. This place is called the Outer Banks, located off the coast of North Carolina. It consists of long, narrow islands that look like nature's speed bumps between the Atlantic Ocean and the mainland. From the air, they stretch out like lazy strips of tan ribbon floating on blue water. You'd never guess anything sinister happened here. It just looks like miles and miles of soft beaches, ready for bonfires and beach parties. Except these islands are, for lack of better words, restless. Geologists sometimes call them barrier islands, but the word barrier makes them sound solid and dependable. Truth is, they're more like runaway sand piles, always rearranging themselves whenever the sea decides to push and pull. Even Google Maps can barely keep up. Islands shift, they slide, they crack in half and come back together again. A storm doesn't just mess up your beach castle, it might literally erase the entire beach. In 1846, a hurricane punched straight through one of these islands and created an entirely new inlet that's been shifting ever since. One other cool example is from 2003, when Hurricane Isabel remodeled the landscape with a brand new 1,700-foot wide inlet. It cut a section of the island completely. People were stuck on the wrong side. The only way in or out was by boat or airlift because the road was completely underwater. Yes, an entire highway was washed off and submerged. There had to be at least one local who was like, "Hey, cool! I always wanted to live on an island inside another island." More recently, in 2017, a brand new island nicknamed Shelly Island suddenly appeared off Cape Point. People were walking on it, taking selfies, posting TikToks. Less than a year later, gone. Vanished back into the waves like some kind of magic trick. That's what makes this place so unpredictable. It's like the land is on loan from the sea. and the sea always wants it back. But why does this happen? Let's say you build a sandcastle right where the waves keep hitting, not up on the dry sand, but right where the water's coming in and out. Every time you shape it, the water swooshes in and steals a little piece of it. Now imagine that instead of one castle, you're trying to build a whole island like that. That's basically what the Outer Banks do every single day. That's because these islands are made of sand, not rock. Just soft, annoying, squishy sand. And the ocean is constantly poking at them, stealing a bit here, piling up more over there, and rearranging everything like it's playing a giant game of beach Tetris. Now add some powerful forces underneath the water. Here, the Gulf sends up a blast of warm water. The Arctic sends down icy waves, and they collide into a swirling milkshake that scrambles sandbars all over the place. This is what makes it so dangerous for ships. Imagine wearing a pirate hat and navigating your Black Pearl through something so unpredictable. Or even a modern cargo ship. The water's shallow, but it doesn't look shallow. The sandbars are underwater, but they move around. The currents are pulling your ship in every direction except the one you want. And even if you are a master helmsman, you still have to deal with fog so thick you can't see your own mast, followed by storms that smack ships around like toys. As you can see, it's not one single trap, it's the whole ocean acting like it's out to get you. And for thousands of unlucky ships, it did. This stretch of water has always been a magnet for pirates, scavengers, and anyone with an eye for opportunity. You probably heard about Blackbeard, the legendary pirate who plagued the American coastline in the early 1700s. His flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, sank near Beaufort Inlet in 1718. Stories say Blackbeard even blockaded the entire port of Charleston before his ship finally went down. And yep, it's still there. Divers found the wreck in 1996, and they're still pulling up cannons, gold dust, medical tools, and all kinds of 18th century pirate loot. Over the years, locals made a living salvaging whatever the ocean tossed onto their shores. Timber, tools, cargo. If it washed up, it got used. The now abandoned village of Wash Woods, located near the Virginia border, was famously constructed by survivors of a shipwreck. They used cypress planks from a ship that had washed ashore during a storm in 1889 to build the village along the Virginia beach. They built homes, a church, and even a school out of wreckwood. Nice way of recycling. And then there's Nag's Head, which sounds like the name of a pirate bar, but actually comes with one of the coolest legends on the coast. According to local folklore, centuries ago, wreckers in the area came up with a sneaky trick. They'd tie lanterns to the necks of old horses or nags and walk them along the dunes at night. From far out at sea, that bobbing light looked like another ship sailing safely near the shore. Captains would follow it thinking they were in safe water, only to slam straight into a hidden sandbar. Now, is that legend true? Probably not. Historians haven't found any solid evidence that it ever happened. However, when the ocean is sinking ships full of goodies near your shores, becoming a shipwreck scavenger starts to sound like a pretty solid career move. But even with modern technology, ships are still getting wrecked. In 2012, the tall ship Bounty sank off the coast during Hurricane Sandy. It was a modern tragedy with a very old pattern. A ship meets a storm, and the storm wins. The boat was actually famous. It was a Hollywood-built replica of the 18th century Royal Navy ship with the same name, created for the movie Mutiny on the Bounty. The original met its fate in 1789, when it was burned after the infamous mutiny. Then in 2020, the Ocean Pursuit, a commercial fishing vessel, ran aground near Bodie Island. And it's still there, slowly being swallowed by sand and surf. There are many similar examples. Whether you're a pirate, a U-boat commander, or just trying to catch some tuna, the graveyard of the Atlantic doesn't care. If you sail around here, you might just become part of the collection. And get this, we haven't even found everything yet. A lot of shipwrecks in the Outer Banks are still buried under sand dunes or lurking underwater. Some of them only show up when storms change things around. kind of like the ocean lifting a little peek of its curtain. Archaeologists keep finding new wrecks, even decades or centuries after those ships went missing. Who knows what else is hiding down there? It could be a real pirate treasure. Maybe some cannons or a whole ship lost to time. Not to mention that it's not just about money or gold coins. Every wreck is a time capsule, sealing away stories of people, technology, and history. To divers and archaeologists, that's a kind of treasure you can't put a price on. But if it's so dangerous, why do they still use these ocean routes? Even with the risks, ships still pass near the Outer Banks, since it's right in the way of a major shipping route. The Atlantic coast of the US is super busy, and the Outer Banks is positioned between northern ports and southern ports. If you're transporting goods, it's tough to find a shortcut without wasting time and fuel. Plus, modern technology does help. I guess the moral of the story is, get a better ship with GPS and sonars. The graveyard of the Atlantic is still open for business. Ships keep sailing through, storms keep rolling in. And the sea?
On a fine summer night of August 30th, 1892, a shipping magnate took his family for a cruise on Lake Superior. They were traveling on the Western Reserve, which was supposed to be one of the safest ships of its day. It was made of a type of steel like that used to construct the infamous Titanic, and it ended up with a similar tragic destiny. The ship broke in two and was found only 132 years later, in 2024. The 300-foot steamship was the first steel-plated freighter on the Great Lakes. One newspaper called it the Inland Greyhound because of how quickly it cut through the water. Peter H. Minch was the owner and inventor of this vehicle, which had been built just 2 years earlier in Cleveland. On the night of its last voyage, the ship set off toward Two Harbors, Minnesota. Minch brought along 5 of his family members: his wife, their 2 kids, his sister-in-law, and his niece. There were also 22 crew members aboard. It was a pleasant and smooth ride while they were sailing across Lake Huron. But as soon as they left Whitefish Bay, the lake turned wild, and the crew had to drop anchor for a while. Later that evening, as they entered Lake Superior around 9 p.m., a fierce summer storm moved in with powerful winds and crashing waves. Then disaster. The ship began to split in two. Within just 10 minutes, the Western Reserve was completely underwater. Everyone managed to get into lifeboats. The Minch family, with some crew members, took the wooden one, and the remaining 10 people got into the metal one. But the storm was so brutal that the metal boats sank right away, and only a few made it into the other lifeboat. That second boat floated for the next 10 hours. A steamship passed by, but didn't notice or hear the people calling for help. Around 7 o'clock the next morning, the lifeboat got within a mile of shore near Deer Park, Michigan. They were so close to safety, but sadly, the lifeboat flipped too, and they all ended up in the freezing water. The only survivor of this tragedy was 24-year-old Harry Stewart, the ship's wheelsman. He swam a full mile through the freezing water and made it to shore, almost unconscious but alive. He later mentioned he survived only thanks to a heavy-knit, close-fitting pea jacket. The Western Reserve was lost for over 100 years until a couple of determined explorers finally tracked it down. They spent over 2 years searching non-stop for the wreck off Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Daryl and Dan Ertl found it using a side-scan sonar that looks half a mile out on each side. One day, they saw a tiny blip on the left side of the scan. It was small, but Daryl measured the shadow, noticed that it was about 40 feet tall, and realized it must be something important. So they turned back and scanned directly over the spot. They saw cargo hatches and the wreck that looked like the ship had snapped in two, with one half lying on top of the other in an almost impossible position. Each piece measured around 150 feet long, and once they checked the width, they knew for sure that they had just found the legendary Western Reserve. Historians are still not sure why the vessel, that was supposed to be unsinkable, suddenly snapped in half, but they have a few solid theories. One idea is something called hogging. It happens when the ship rides up over a giant wave and the bow and stern are left hanging in the air with nothing underneath to support them. That puts a large amount of pressure on the middle, and it bends down like a stick when you're pulling both ends. Another plausible reason concerns the steel the vessel was made of. Back then, steel was the hot new substitute for iron. But quality control wasn't perfect. Some steel plates weren't made very well, which could have caused a serious weak point in the ship's body. There's also the chance that the ship didn't have enough ballast, which is the weight used to keep it stable, or maybe it wasn't balanced correctly. Sadly, just 8 weeks after the Western Reserve tragedy, another vessel that had been built at the same time with similar mill runs of steel plate repeated the destiny of its twin. The W.H. Gilcher was a steam freighter used to transport cargo between ports on the Great Lakes. It set out on what was supposed to be a routine trip on October 26, 1892. Loaded with over 3,000 tons of coal, the ship left Buffalo heading for Milwaukee. Captain Leeds H. Weeks and a crew of 18 were on board. Everything seemed normal at first, and by the afternoon of October 28th, the ship passed through the Straits of Mackinac and entered Lake Michigan. It was expected to reach Milwaukee by the 30th, but it never made it. A massive storm slammed into Lake Michigan and Lake Huron on October 28th and 29th, and created havoc on travel plans for many ships. When the storm finally passed and boats started pulling into port, people began to piece together what happened to the W.H. Gilcher. One captain who was sailing nearby on his schooner said he saw a large steamer battling the storm about 20 miles northwest of North Manitou Island around 8 p.m. on the 28th. The ship looked helpless, and there was no movement or sign of life. Another captain later saw furniture and parts of the ship's bridge floating in the lake near South Manitou Island. Then 2 more steamers picked up broken pieces of W.H. Gilcher's pilot house in the same area. It became clear that the storm had destroyed the freighter, and tragically, no one survived. The Great Lakes are a hot spot for shipwrecks, and there have been between 6,000 to 10,000 of those starting in the 17th century. Back in 1679, the Griffon became the first European vessel to vanish without a trace on the lakes. It sailed all the way from Buffalo, New York, to Green Bay, Wisconsin, passing through Lake Erie, the Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Huron before reaching Lake Michigan. After a stop in Green Bay, it started heading back, and then it was never seen again. In 1975, one of the most famous shipwrecks happened when the massive 729-foot ore carrier SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. A fall storm was supposed to stay far south of their route, but things changed fast. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, was following behind and kept in radio contact with the Fitz's captain, Ernest McSorley. By the afternoon of November 10th, waves were smashing over the deck, and wind gusts at over 80 miles per hour were hitting both ships hard. By 7:20 p.m., the Anderson couldn't reach the Fitzgerald by radio anymore, and it had vanished from radar. There was no distress call, no warning. The huge ship had just disappeared. Later, search crews found the wreck over 530 feet under the surface, broken into 2 giant pieces. No one of the 29 crew members survived, and no one witnessed what really happened. There could be all sorts of reasons for such tragedies, from errors in judgment and equipment failure to simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Great Lakes are massive bodies of water with weather systems that you would expect to find in seas. These inland seas sit deep in the middle of the continent, and hurricane-strength winds and powerful storms form here. Many of them hit in November and December, when the waters are still warm from the summer, but Canadian cold air is starting to push down. There's a huge difference in temperature between the air and water. This difference and strong winds lead to massive waves. Plus, ice forms more easily in fresh water than in salt water. It builds up on ships quickly, and crew members also have to get around tricky ice waters.
Water levels here are also unstable. In wet years, storms are more likely to happen, and this makes the risk of damage or disaster higher.
360 years ago, a massive British ship, the London, blew up in the Thames estuary. The tragedy took over 300 lives, including the sailors and their loved ones. No one knows exactly what led to all this, but scientists are finally getting close to the truth. Divers accidentally found an exceptionally well-preserved bronze cannon from the ship. This cannon, that was buried in silt and clay for centuries, could have all the answers. The London was a service ship built for the Navy of the Commonwealth of England. It set off on its first journey in June 1656. The ship played a huge role in British history as it was part of a convoy that went to the Netherlands in 1660 to collect Charles II and restore him to the throne. 5 years later, in March 1665, it was traveling from Chatham to Hope. From there, the Admiral Sir John Lawson was supposed to take it to the sea. But just before reaching the buoy of the Knower, the gunpowder suddenly blew up on the ship. About 25 people who were in the roundhouse and coach survived, but over 300 drowned. The ship broke into 2 pieces. Henry Bennett, the Earl of Arlington, passed along rumors that it all happened because of cheap, low-quality gunpowder that was on the ship. When experts of that time inspected the shipwreck, they concluded that the cannons could still be salvaged, but the ship itself was a total loss. Later, when someone recovered some of them, in 1679, there was a scandal where they tried to use them to settle a completely unrelated debt. In 2005, divers rediscovered the London. To protect it, port authorities even had to move the shipping lane, and a team of archaeologists got to work exploring it. That wreck is a big deal because it gives us real insights into English naval history. Visibility in the Thames estuary can be terrible. Sometimes you can't even see 1.5 feet in front of you. Working on the site is also super tough because it's in a crazy tidal environment, and a busy shipping lane, where huge cargo ships constantly pass by, is still near. So when a cannon suddenly appeared, stuck deep in the clay, it meant the conditions had to be absolutely perfect. Experts believe the find is from the Commonwealth era, and it's medium size, about 8 feet 6 inches long. It was part of a special set made specifically for the London and was placed on the ship's lower deck. Every single gun carriage on the London was one of a kind because all of its cannons came from different countries and different periods in naval history. Big cannons were really rare and crazy expensive to make since they needed tons of bronze or iron and had to be individually cast. That's why the Navy often grabbed cannons from captured rival ships, old shipwrecks, or decommissioned vessels. The new find is one of the clues that could eventually help scientists to solve the mystery of the London tragedy. So far, they've also found leather shoes, pieces of instruments, wooden tools, rope, and a compass. All these artifacts are like puzzle pieces to them. They still don't have enough evidence to be sure, but it looks like both the pipe and candles could have been sources of flames that set off a larger bang. Some workers made another amazing find at a flooded quarry in nearby southeast England, about 60 miles southeast of London. They stumbled upon the remains of a rare Elizabethan-era ship hundreds of yards away from the nearest coastline. Finding a ship from the late 1500s is a huge deal, because very few vessels from that time have survived. Studying it could help scientists answer some big questions about an important era in history, when England was becoming a major player in European trade. Today, the quarry site is about 1,000 feet from the sea, but back in the 1500s, it was actually part of the coastline. Archaeologists think the ship either wrecked on a rocky headland or someone dumped it there when it was too damaged to sail anymore. Scientists haven't identified it yet, but they studied over 100 pieces of its wooden hull, reading the tree rings, and found that it was built from English oak trees cut down between 1558 and 1580. At that time, Northern Europe was switching from the old clinker method where the planks overlapped like fish scales to the Carville style from the Mediterranean, where the planks are smooth and flush against each other, nailed to an internal frame. Old wood usually rots away pretty fast when it's exposed to air or water. But if it's buried under a thick, oxygen-free layer of mud or silt, it can survive for centuries. That's exactly what happened here. The team is using laser scanning and digital photography to document everything about the wreck. Once they finish their research, they plan to rebury the timbers under the silt in the Quarry Lake, so the ship can stay there safe for many more centuries to come. A team of archaeologists in Norway found a ship in an even more unexpected location, in a flat field. There's a hill nearby called Gel Mound. It's actually a huge burial monument that the Vikings themselves had built. The farmer who owns the field wanted to dig some drainage ditches, but first, he needed experts to check for anything important underground. Archaeologists used a high-resolution georadar attached to a tractor-like vehicle. When they scanned the field, they discovered that it used to be packed with burial mounds, at least 8 new ones nobody had ever found before. And beneath one of the mounds, the radar picked up the outline of a ship. Back in Viking times, ships were super valuable, so they only buried them with really important people. Scientists have only found 3 boat burials in all of Norway before, and this is the first new one in years. The team believes this ship is from Viking times, probably between the years 500 and 1000 CE. Because the burial mound above it got flat over time, the ship is now only about 1.6 feet below the ground. That's super close to the surface. It's around 66 feet long, and the radar showed that parts like the keel and the floorboards are still preserved. The archaeologists plan to explore more using non-invasive tools so they don't wreck anything by accident. If they need to, they'll start an excavation. Far away from Norway in the Namibian desert, a miner looking for gems accidentally found a legendary shipwreck almost 500 years old. The workers called in an archaeologist to check it out, and they thought it must have been the remains of a Portuguese trading ship, the Bom Jesus, that had mysteriously vanished in the 1500s. The Bom Jesus had left Lisbon loaded with treasures, aiming for India. But somewhere along the southern tip of Africa, a brutal storm slammed it into the Namibian coast. The ship smashed into rocks, broke apart, and disappeared under the waves. When archaeologists explored the wreck, they found parts of the ship scattered across the shore and buried under thick sand, which actually saved the remains from rotting away. They even discovered treasure, over 40 tons of cargo that had spilled out of the captain's chest underwater when the hull broke. There were cannons, swords, fabrics, tools sailors used to navigate by the stars, and most impressive of all, 1,845 copper ingots, solid pieces of metal weighing 16 to 17 tons in total. Scientists could even read the old trademarks stamped on them, revealing they were made by a mega-rich German trading company. And then there was the real jackpot. More than 2,000 gold and silver coins from all over the world, Portugal, Venice, France, and the Moorish states, plus 105 giant elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely on their way to become luxury goods like jewelry and fine carvings. DNA tests later showed the ivory came from West African forest and savanna elephants. They didn't find many bones though, which means the crew either managed to escape or were lost forever at sea.
A ship filled with gold and other treasures worth over $13 million was found in the middle of the Namibian desert after almost 500 years. The worker who found it was actually looking for diamonds, but ended up with something way more valuable for history. There were some blocks of copper, some wood, pipes, and elephant tusks. The miners called for an archaeologist, who soon realized it wasn't a disturbed beach like they thought, but a shipwreck. All evidence showed that it was a Portuguese trading vessel, Bom Jesus, that went missing in the 16th century. Experts believe it was a special kind of ship that was bigger, stronger, and better than older ships from Portugal and Spain. These ships were built to take Portuguese explorers on long trips to distant places like India, China, and Japan. and come back with tons of cargo. The Bom Jesus was likely carrying treasures from Lisbon, Portugal, to Western India. But it looks like on its way around the southern tip of Africa, near Namibia, a big storm pushed the ship too close to the shore. The ship hit a rock, tipped over, and broke apart, sinking into the ocean. Archaeologists found treasure from the captain's chest under the water, which probably fell out when the ship's wooden hull broke. They also found pieces of the ship scattered along the shore, likely from the violent storm and later by construction in the area. The storm must have been very fierce, but they didn't find many bones, which means most of the crew may have survived or were lost at sea. The ship was split into 3 sections and incredibly well preserved, thanks to the thick layers of sand that covered it and prevented rot. Archaeologists who studied the wreck discovered over 40 tons of cargo. There were cannons, swords, blocks of metal like lead and tin, fabrics, and tools that sailors used to navigate the stars while traveling across the ocean. The most exciting discovery was 1,845 copper ingots, weighing as much as 16 to 17 tons altogether. Those copper ingots, or pieces of pure metal, are still in great condition because the hull of the ship and layers of sand protected them from ocean water. The scientists even managed to read the trademarks on them on site and learned they were made by a super wealthy German trading company. There were also more than 2,000 shiny gold and silver coins from different countries, and 105 enormous elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely supposed to become luxury items like jewelry or carvings at the destination. Archaeologists took some DNA samples from the tusks and found that they came from West African forests and savanna elephants. Researchers were lucky that the ship was found in a restricted diamond mining area. No scavengers were able to get their hands on the treasures. The Bom Jesus remains the oldest and most valuable shipwreck that was ever discovered off the western coast of sub-Saharan Africa. Another shipwreck recently found by accident was buried under a 10-foot-tall sand dune near the Caspian Sea. Some people call it the world's largest lake, and it has water levels that rise and fall over time because of the changes in weather patterns. These changes can move sand and uncover things like this shipwreck and other treasures along the coast. As the dune slowly disappeared, the ship started to show. Before digging it out, scientists worried that waves from the sea might damage the wreck. To protect it, they built a wall using thousands of sandbags to keep the waves away. When the ship was uncovered, they discovered it was a 3-masted, 92-foot-long merchant ship with a strong double hull. Wood samples showed the ship was built in the 18th to 19th century using trees like Scots pine, spruce, and larch from the Volga River area or the Caucasus. They even found buckwheat and plants from the same region, which were probably traded or used to feed the sailors. It proves that the ship was part of a group of merchant ships that once sailed the Caspian Sea. An amateur fisherman who was 20 feet under the sea off the coast of Turkey noticed some huge metal remains. He had an underwater camera, so he made footage of the discovery and took it to scientists. They immediately started an investigation and learned that it must be a shipwreck from the first decades of the 20th century. It could be one of the Ottoman Empire ships that had an important mission to deliver supplies, but disappeared without a trace. Scientists got permission to study this Black Sea wreck in detail to learn more about its mysteries. They're hoping to find its shipyard documents to find some answers, as the ship itself is in terrible condition and is tricky to work with. Robot submersibles that belong to an oil and gas company noticed hundreds of intact ancient storage jars sitting on the seabed in the eastern Mediterranean. Experts think those jars are 3,300 years old. This makes the find the oldest shipwreck from the deep sea. The jugs were probably used to store oil or other agricultural products like fruit. This proves that the people who made them organized maritime trade and had incredible navigational skills. It looks like the ancient mariners managed to traverse the Mediterranean Sea without a line of sight to any coast. All they could see was the horizon, so they must have used the sun and other stars to find their way. Off the coast of Sicily, under 20 feet of sand and rock, archaeologists found a shipwreck so old that they aren't even sure what materials were used to build it. They think the ship is from the 5th or 6th century BCE, which means it's over 2,500 years old. This ancient ship wasn't alone. Researchers also found 2 iron anchors shaped like an upside-down T from around the 7th century of the Common Era, and 4 stone anchors from prehistoric times nearby. One of the stone anchors was broken and may have had wooden pieces attached to help it hold on to the seafloor. They figured out that the ship itself was built using the on-shell technique. The wooden planks of the ship were connected so tightly that they could support the ship on their own, with extra beams added just to make it stronger. Sadly, the ship's wooden hull is very fragile now because tiny sea creatures that eat wood have damaged it over the years. Scientists are being extra careful as they study it to make sure it doesn't fall apart. This discovery is such a big deal because it was built during a time when Sicily was super important for trade. Back then, the Greeks and Punics were trying to take control of the seas long before Rome became the ruler of the Mediterranean. By studying this ship, scientists hope to learn more about how people traveled and traded in those ancient times. One more shipwreck, this time off the coast of Kenya. Could be from Vasco da Gama's final voyage. This Portuguese explorer was the first European to reach India by sea around the Cape of Good Hope. Local fishermen discovered the shipwreck in question in 2013. When an underwater archaeologist came to check it out, he found some treasures at the spot: elephant tusks and valuable copper ingots. If this find really has to do with Vasco da Gama, then it must be from the 16th century. It was the year of his 3rd and final voyage to India. Da Gama led a huge fleet of 20 ships, one of which was the São Jorge. Most of the ship is hidden under layers of coral, and a whole team of scientists are carefully digging trenches to find parts of the ship's wooden frame and hull. A Portuguese archaeologist just discovered a bunch of sunken ships filled with gold, including a Spanish galleon with 22 tons of gold and silver. This much gold today is worth about $2 billion, and this is the money from one ship alone. Archaeologist Alexandre Monteiro made this discovery almost by accident. He was studying some documents when he found some information about a ship that went missing in 1615, and he decided he wanted to find it. After many years, Alexandre found not just this specific ship, he actually discovered 8,620 shipwrecks in the waters of Portugal alone. Out of this number, 250 are gold-filled shipwrecks, a discovery that would make any Jack Sparrow shake in his boots. Most of these ships went down for boring reasons like the weather, but sometimes they were destroyed in battles, which may or may not have been super epic. They were carrying gold and other treasures from the New World to Europe, and of course, everyone wanted a share. Alexandre had been studying historical shipwrecks for 30 years now, so he has discovered many ships that went down in somewhat glorious ways. In 1816, for example, a ship of one of the richest men in Portugal sank in Australia, with an insane amount of 66,000 silver coins. This was the first ship from Portugal to ever plunge in the waters of Australia. The bad news is that these ancient sunken vessels, filled with riches and epic stories, are not so easy to reach. They're deep down in the ocean and covered by sand. You could still try, but that would be stealing part of a country's history, and you wouldn't want to be that person, would you? Naturally, Portugal was not the only country that explored the seas back then. The coast of Europe is packed with sunken ships filled with gold. In fact, there are about 1 million historical shipwrecks underwater right now, and the treasures abandoned under the sea might be worth around $60 billion. It's an insane amount of money, but let me tell you that these gold-filled sunken ships aren't really worth the hassle. There are many stories of maritime treasure discoveries that turned into insane lawsuits and even long jail time. Our first story starts in 1746, when a violent storm crashed a ship called Prince de Conti near an island in Brittany. The ship was filled with tea, ceramics, and 100 gold ingots. Of course, the owners of the ship tried to save the loot, but if it's not easy now, imagine how it was back in the 18th century. It took more than 200 years for the vessel to be found. It finally happened in 1975, when a group of French men discovered it and decided to take pretty much every valuable thing they could find. Now, I said these things were not worth the trouble for a reason. In France, if you find anything that can be historical, you must declare it to the local authorities within 48 hours. Fail to comply, and you will be committing something known as a crime. To be fair, our French friends here did declare their findings, but only the corroded cannons from the ship. And the gold? Well, they sold it. Obviously, because each gold bar is worth between $125,000 to $231,000. It took French authorities almost 50 years to retrieve the stolen gold, and they didn't retrieve all of it. Part of it was bought by an elderly couple living in Florida, and the crime is so serious they were charged for connection with money laundering, organized crime, and the trafficking of cultural goods. The poachers also sold some gold ingots to the British Museum collection. Now, let's go back to the 1850s, when a steamer called SS Central America traveled from Panama to California and back again. This was during the California Gold Rush, a time when 300,000 people moved to California to dig for gold. Because the travel route was not easy breezy, people needed to carry their gold around on big ships. This is where our friend SS Central America comes in. In 1857, the ship had 578 people on board and about 10 tons of gold. Very few survived, and around $100 to $150 million in gold went down with the ship. All of this explains why in 1988, a group of investors from Columbus decided to finance a research project to find this ship. The research was led by a guy named Tommy Thompson. Tommy was really crazy about the idea of finding this sunken ship filled with gold. It took him years to find the exact location of the SS Central America, especially because the ship was 7,500 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, and retrieving it required a lot of fancy tech. A group of 161 investors paid for his adventure, but it goes without saying that they were not doing this out of love from their hearts. They invested $12.5 million in this project because they were expecting to earn at least 10 times more. But since life is not all sunshine and rainbows, 39 insurance companies sued the research team as soon as they retrieved the gold. Back when the ship was up and running, these companies insured the cargo of the SS Central America, and when the cargo was finally retrieved, more than 100 years later, they wanted to be compensated. They said it was not their job to retrieve it, but that doesn't mean they abandoned it. This crazy talk didn't stick, and 92% of the gold was given to the research team. The plot thickened when the investors were scammed by none other than Tommy Thompson, who fled with $4.16 million. He also had 500 gold coins, but he's not telling a soul where they are. Nonsense like this is the reason why most countries have rules to protect cultural properties. And yes, sometimes shipwrecks can be a cultural property. Obviously, there are many maritime treasure discoveries that happen without breaking any laws. The SS City of Cairo, for example, was a steamship that submerged in 1929 with 2,000 boxes of silver coins weighing 122 tons. A company called Deep Ocean Search retrieved the coins from a depth of 17,000 feet, which is 4,500 feet lower than the Titanic. 34 million pounds went to the UK Treasury, and the Deep Ocean Search also got a share. The good news here is that some of the coins can be bought by collectors, legally. Paying for a treasure is probably the closest you can get to an underwater archaeology find. I know, all I did was destroy your piracy dreams. But while raiding gold-filled shipwrecks may be a crime in most countries, or just financially impossible for us mere mortals, not all hope is lost. There is about $771 trillion worth of gold lying on the ocean floor, and it doesn't have an owner. It's like an underwater gold mine, except the gold is in the water. You know how the water of the ocean is salty? Well, the gold gets mixed with the minerals in the water, so it's not like you stumble upon a gold nugget on the beach. Each liter of ocean water has 13 billionths of a gram of gold, and it's very difficult to extract such tiny particles of gold from the water. But that doesn't mean people haven't tried, and of course, there's been a scam here too. In the 1890s, a guy claimed he had invented a thing that would suck gold from the seawater. When he got enough money, he fled the country with the cash. If you really want to get some gold, you could try to extract it from the Earth's core, which has 1.6 quadrillion tons of gold. There's 16 times more gold in the Earth's core than what humans have mined in the whole of history. No hoax involved here, because nobody has dared to go down there yet. With archaeologists discovering gold-filled sunken ships out and about, maybe we can make our own maritime treasure discoveries, or at least save enough money to buy some silver coins. In some regions of the Pacific Ocean, ships sink very easily, which is why it is feared by many sailors. Although there are many routes in that area, there are some that few dare to risk because crossing them can mean facing extremely dangerous forces of nature. If you need to travel from Asia to America by ship, the most obvious route would be the shortest and quickest. That is, a nearly straight line under the North Pacific Ocean. But instead, it might be better to avoid crossing this place and opt for longer and more expensive, but much safer routes. There is not one, but several reasons. The Pacific is home to some of the most dangerous waters in the world. When we open a world map, we usually see that the Pacific Ocean is kinda divided, which prevents us from realizing how big it is. But in reality, this giant covers almost a third of Earth's surface. It's about 10 times larger than the smallest ocean in the world, the Arctic Ocean. In other words, when crossing it, the chances of being cut off from any landmass are very high. And in cases of emergencies, mechanical failures, or even storms, help might take days or even weeks to arrive. This significantly increases the risk of serious accidents, the possibility of cargo loss, and, in more serious cases, something even worse. Now think about it. A ship journey from Santos, Brazil to Cape Town, South Africa covers a little more than 3,400 miles. To get from Callao, Peru to Shanghai, China, you need to travel around 10,000 miles. Another major problem that prevents sailors from crossing the Pacific is storm systems, whose name already indicates what they contain: unpredictable and therefore dangerous storms. In addition, near the equator, there is a chain of winds called trade winds that directly influence the climate in the tropical region and occasionally cause rain. Trade winds are strong and constant winds that act like a whirlwind that rotates without stopping. And although they are extremely important for nature, as they spread moisture through forests and even influence the formation of deserts, they pose a problem. Their intensity changes depending on the season. In winter, for example, they can be much stronger. And since these winds are responsible for moving the ocean waters, they also create strong sea currents that could make the journey much more dangerous. In 2015, researchers came across a series of extremely strong winter trade winds that caused a surge of short but intense waves in the Pacific Ocean. They observed that those waves began to hit the ship with constant force, as if they were repeatedly punching it. As a result, the hull structure was completely twisted and deformed. And in the end, they confirmed what they had already known. Those waves, caused by winter trade winds, could be a real threat to vessels. And by the way, Do you remember that help in the middle of the Pacific can take a considerable amount of time to arrive? So, now there is much more than one reason behind the hostility of the winds. Such a large ocean doesn't have many geographical barriers, such as mountains or large islands. It means that there are no land structures around it that could hold back or slow down the winds and currents. So the trade winds and ocean currents have complete freedom to gain strength and speed. This explains why the Pacific is the scene of powerful storms and giant waves. This is different, for example, from the North Atlantic, where North America, Europe, and Africa help to contain and redirect the atmospheric and maritime systems. It is now very common for scientists to see the bottom of the Pacific Ocean as a giant jigsaw puzzle because it's literally full of moving pieces. It's home to the largest number of tectonic plates on the planet, and one of them, the Pacific Plate, is the largest maritime plate that science has ever identified. This particularity makes the region extremely unstable to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Even though the ocean may seem calm at first glance due to its geology, things can change very quickly. This makes it unpredictable and treacherous. For example, in 2022, the cargo ship 1 Apis was crossing the ocean, 1,600 miles northwest of Hawaii, when it was caught in a torrential storm. As a result, more than 1,800 containers were damaged, falling to the bottom of the sea. Hundreds more collapsed on the deck, turning into a real-life steel domino due to the force of the wind. The captain managed to steer the ship to Japan. The journey lasted about a week, and it was only when they got there that they understood the extent of the loss. But it wasn't just the 1 Apis. The following year, the ship Maersk Essen lost about 750 containers, while the Maersk Eindhoven lost more than 260. In both cases, the routes were bound for Asia. These three alone have already accounted for much more than the global annual average of containers lost at sea, which is about 1,382 per year. And the most curious thing is that these events happened in winter. Speaking of winter, it was in the winter of 2020 that the Pacific made history. Scientists recorded a 58-foot high wave in the ocean, which is equivalent to the height of a 5 or even 6-story building. In general, a wave is considered giant or extreme when it's more than twice the height of the others around it. This one, however, was almost 3 times bigger than the rest. Now, it's important to remember that despite being rare and scary, these waves are not a tsunami, as they're caused by wind. Tsunamis, on the other hand, usually occur after underwater earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. Another big monster of the Pacific are typhoons, and the 2024 typhoon season confirmed this. One of the highlights was Hurricane Christy. It did not touch the crust, meaning it did not cause direct damage, but we cannot underestimate it. Christy reached Category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is the maximum level. A hurricane of this degree is considered catastrophic, so it's no wonder that it was powerful enough to generate huge waves and extremely dangerous rip currents. In addition to this, there was also Super Typhoon Yagi, which hit the Asian continent with such force that it gained the reputation of the most powerful in the last 70 years. When it arrived in Vietnam, it caused around $1.6 billion in damage, destroyed infrastructure in several cities, and left a trail of victims wherever it went. As if that weren't enough, the Pacific is also home to one of the most unstable regions on the planet, the famous Pacific Ring of Fire. It's a huge, crack-shaped area that's home to intense volcanic and seismic activity. It's the most tectonically active place in the world, as the plates of the Earth's crust are constantly moving there. They move apart and collide, or grind against each other, which causes the region to experience earthquakes and volcanic eruptions all the time. Seismographs record some type of tremor there every 5 minutes. This dangerous region is responsible for about 90% of the planet's earthquakes. So, 9 out of 10 tremors occur within this ring, which stretches across the northern Pacific. And the worst part is that it doesn't just affect North America or Asia. In 2023, tremors linked to the Ring of Fire were felt in several Latin American countries, such as Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, and Peru. There was a trail of destruction, and the lives of around 15 people were lost. There's no shortage of reasons for ships to avoid the shortest route across the Pacific and opt for longer routes. As the popular saying goes, prevention is better than cure.
Welcome to the Spirit of Discovery cruise ship, which will take you on an unforgettable sea voyage around the Canary Islands. The azure endless ocean, delicious food, the highest service, premium cabins, and a terrible nightmare that you will probably remember for the rest of your life. This is exactly how one luxury trip of the Saga Cruises Company ended last year. Instead of relaxing during the cruise, passengers felt fear and horror, and even had health problems. And that's why. On October 24th, the Spirit of Discovery liner started a 2-week cruise around the Canary Islands. There were about 1,500 people on board. About 1,000 were passengers, and the rest were crew members. The first week went great, but then the liner encountered a serious problem called nature. There were strong winds and big waves. The captain decided to return to the UK ahead of time, but the decision was made too late. The ship was caught in a severe storm in the Bay of Biscay. A powerful wind with a force of 11 points hit the vessel. To make it easier for you to understand, the 11-point wind is able to tear out trees together with roots, destroy residential buildings, and plunge entire cities into chaos. Such a storm is rare, but Spirit of Discovery was unlucky enough to get into its epicenter. 11 points is the penultimate place on the Beaufort scale, which determines the wind rating. The most powerful storm has 12 points, and this is a hurricane. The wind reached a speed of 65 miles per hour, which is about the same as the average speed of a car on a highway. Not only did it push the Spirit of Discovery, but it also raised huge waves 25 feet high. Just imagine a wall of water the height of a 3-story building collapsing on a lone ocean liner. At that moment, the captain sent a message to all the passengers through the cabin speakers so that no one left their place. And his voice sounded worried enough. All the passengers had to lie down and hold on tight. According to the witnesses' words, the ship remained caught in the storm for about 15 hours. They held on with all their might so as not to crash into the walls and floor. All this time, tables were flying around the ship, dishes were breaking, furniture was moving all over the cabins. The waves smashed windows, partitions, and doors. Some people were knocked down because they couldn't hold on for so long. The storm hurled the passengers from ceiling to floor, from wall to wall. The ship's crew turned the dining room into a medical area to provide assistance to those who had been hurt. Despite the difficult and terrible conditions, the ship's team did a great job. They regularly informed passengers about the current situation and tried to calm everyone down. There was no panic and chaos on board. When the storm finally ended, the ship continued its journey and finally reached land, where medics urgently evacuated 8 passengers to the hospital. One of them was never able to survive this storm. It's good the ship didn't meet a rogue wave during the storm. This is a natural phenomenon that can appear during a storm and even in still water. It's a giant wave with a height of 60 feet. Like a 6-story house, it collapses onto a ship with incredible speed and capsizes it. And then the wave suddenly disappears. This is no joke. A similar wave has been recorded in the Gulf Stream off of Charleston, South Carolina. It's scary to get in its way. Now, let's go back to the past to remember one of the most terrible maritime tragedies. No, we're not talking about the Titanic. We'll talk about the Greek liner Laconia, which set sail from the English port of Southampton on December 19, 1963, with more than 600 people on board. However, just 3 days later, A terrible tragedy happened to the ship in the boundless waters of the Atlantic. At 11 p.m., in the barbershop hall, an electrical malfunction occurred. The problem led to a fire, which quickly spread to other rooms. The crew couldn't cope with it, since the fire was spreading too fast. The ship's team turned on the fire alarm, but there was no command to leave the vessel. Only 2 hours later, the captain ordered the passengers to evacuate. All this time, people were either relaxing in their cabins or enjoying a party in the ballroom. The crew was probably trying to put out the fire without causing panic. However, when the situation became critical, the evacuation began. People panicked and ran to the lifeboats, but many didn't manage to get inside. One of them was John Morris. He survived this catastrophe and shared his memories of how he put his family in a lifeboat while he stayed on board the ship. He didn't even have a life jacket. Since there was nowhere to go, the ship's crew opened a bar so that people could relax a little. However, at that moment, boilers began to explode inside the ship, and it became clear the vessel wouldn't stay afloat for too long. John Morris decided to jump into the water right in his tuxedo. As soon as he was overboard, he grabbed onto a piece of wooden deck cargo and swam as far away from the ship as he could. The giant liner could sink at any moment, and when such a huge object goes down to the seabed, it forms a water funnel that pulls along everything around. Rescuers arrived at the scene sometime later. Fortunately, John Morris's pregnant wife and young son were alive, but his mother-in-law unfortunately didn't survive the disaster, like many other people that day. Of course, after this incident, the Greek Ministry of Merchant Marine initiated a thorough investigation. For 2 years, they collected information from passengers and the captain, studied the technical characteristics of the ship, and eventually came to certain conclusions. According to them, the ship's crew gave the evacuation order too late. Not all passengers were able to get into lifeboats, but half of those boats remained on board because of the chaos that prevailed during the evacuation. Several officers of the liner were accused of negligence, but the captain and his first mate received the most criticism. As for John Morris, he stated that he felt himself under protection that day. Another unusual story happened on a cruise ship relatively recently. Spoiler alert, the ship didn't sink, there was no evacuation, and the weather was good. However, for many passengers, this journey became a real challenge. Imagine that you've been working for a long time and saving up money to go on your dream trip on the Celebrity Mercury cruise ship in the Caribbean. You arrive in South Carolina, from where the ship begins its journey. You get on board, looking forward to a week's rest. At first, everything is fine. People are having fun, chefs are cooking delicious dishes, and beautiful daytime landscapes turn into night parties. But then suddenly, many passengers start throwing up. Someone is in a hurry to go to the toilet, and someone stays and vomits right in the halls. The cruise turns into chaos. More and more people feel terrible because of unknown poisoning. You also visited the restaurant and eaten seafood, but fortunately, the disease has avoided you, which can't be said for more than 400 other passengers. Almost every 1 in 4 people on board face gastrointestinal problems. There were almost 2,000 people, and a quarter of them are in bad condition. Crew members do endless cleaning. They wash the deck, give people nausea pills, and ask them not to leave the cabin till the illness passes. The captain sends several samples ashore to determine what caused the poisoning. Unfortunately, the cruise is already ruined, and all the passengers have unpleasant memories. So the company organizing the trip issues certificates that can be used on future cruises. It's not the most pleasant experience, but it's still better than nothing. Now, imagine if, instead of just feeling sick, people got infected with some kind of bacterium that would turn them into zombies. It would be much more exciting and scary. Now, do you think you could survive on such a ship full of zombies? And how would you do that? Tell me about it in the comments. The year was 1865. It was a boom of migration worldwide, with novel places discovered and new settlements created. Without planes like we have now, a ship was the only way to escape from the old life and journey towards a new, hopefully brighter future. So, a voyage like that was quite a regular thing to do. More than 500 immigrants safely reached Queensland, and the ship was supposed to head back to London sometime later. It was indeed a long journey, but not many people were willing to return to England. After all, they had chosen to come to Australia to create a brand new life. So it was only natural that the ship would come back nearly empty. However, the return trip was still quite lucrative, thanks to the cargo the ship would carry. The amount of produce ready to be shipped was substantial, primarily consisting of wool soaked in arsenic, tallow, and hides. It was two birds with one stone. Not only could the crew wait out the winter, warm in Australia, while England endured bitter cold, but they also wouldn't waste their time. With the sheer volume of produce to be loaded, it would take them around 3 months to accomplish this task. Reports were circulating that the Fiery Star was almost done loading up, but it turned out that the assessment was a bit too optimistic. To pass the time, Captain Ewell thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the Acclimatization Society and offer to help transport any animals they wanted to send to England on the Fiery Star. He already had some emus and kangaroos on board, but there was still room. The society held a vote, and they were totally on board, pun intended, with Captain Ewell's idea. They figured sending some taligalas would be a great plan. Even though a few of these birds were already in England, the French Society needed a couple, and they could get them shipped there through England. Little did the crew know that all this cargo, all the produce they were willing to sell in England, would ultimately lead to the ship's destruction. Not only was the Fiery Star lost, but most of the people on board did not survive to complete the voyage. March 23rd. That was the day when the ship manifest was finally published. A manifest is a list that details the cargo, passengers, and crew of a ship, plane, or vehicle, primarily for customs officials. This document helps those involved in the transport verify that everyone and everything that was loaded is still on board when the vehicle reaches its destination. Once it's published, it means the ship is almost ready to depart. There were 3 possible ways of passenger accommodation. First, there was the saloon, the antiquated name for first class. Next, there was the second cabin, which is, logically, second class. Finally, there was the steerage, the cheapest form of passenger accommodation on a ship. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people traveled from their homelands, often to North America and Australia, looking for a fresh start. Most of them were poor and had limited funds for travel. In total, there were 8 people in the saloon, another 8 in the second cabin, and only 21 steerage passengers. Out of the 37 passengers, only one, John Omond, would make it out alive. He bought a ticket for the steerage, so unlike the Titanic situation, in this case, the class didn't really matter. The crew members list wasn't as detailed as the passengers. It was known that, in total, there were around 55 people in the crew, from able-bodied seamen to crew members simply called boys. But there's something telling me that the crew wasn't really that important for the captain. In reality, all that mattered to him was to make as much money as possible, shipping tons of dangerous, flammable cargo. Out of over 50 crew members, only 17 survived that voyage. But there was actually one more crew member who actually survived it all, just because they weren't let in. Sarah Johnson disguised herself as a man and planned to sneak onto the ship. However, something about her looks made the captain get suspicious, so he called the police and made Sarah leave the ship as he didn't want any immoral behavior to take place. Well, he saved her life. For him, it was the last voyage. The captain, W. Hunter Ewell, was quite a celebrity apparently. He already had a record of the safe landing of immigrants in the previous year, so there seemingly was no reason to worry. The trip promised to be safe. Clipper Fiery Star left Moreton Bay bound for London. The passengers took their places. The cargo had already been loaded. The full list is astonishing. In addition to all the wool, tallow, cotton, hides, and horns, there were also 6 cases of arrowroot and various other packages. And we can't forget the animals the captain took aboard too. The fiery star was far away, yet still observable to the east as it headed toward the Pacific Ocean. This was the last information available until May 26, when news of its destruction emerged from Brisbane. Chief Officer William Sargent's log reveals that the fiery star took 12 days to reach the southern tip of New Zealand, passing on April 11, 1865. The trip was going well until heavy seas ruined 2 longboats on April 17th. On this day, a strong odor of smoke alerted the captain. When he checked, he found the lower hold completely filled with smoke from a fire fueled by the ship's flammable cargo. The hatches were quickly closed to try to contain the flames, but by the next day, the heat and toxic smoke had forced passengers out of their cabins. George Maber was one of the lucky survivors. He was the ship's engineer, and he recalled the chaotic events on April 20th, as Captain Ewell and most of the crew and passengers tried to evacuate in rough weather. At around 6 p.m., the ship took on water, and without much warning, Captain Ewell, 4 crew members, and a few female passengers hopped into a lifeboat and headed out. The next boat, managed by the second mate, Mr. Adio, was a gig, followed by a crowded jolly boat. Lastly, there was a waste boat, which was barely seaworthy, with 2 men constantly bailing water to keep it afloat. The plan was for the boats to stay close to the fiery star overnight and head for the Chatham Islands the next morning. But by dawn on April 21st, all 4 boats had vanished without a trace. On the burning ship, there were 17 crew members and passenger John Oman, who banded together under Chief Officer William Sargent's leadership. For 5 days and nights, George Maber pumped water on the fire without rest. He volunteered to go down the forehatch with a rope around him and a handkerchief over his mouth. He discovered that the foremast had been burned through for about 7 inches, and the port side was severely damaged, resembling an empty shell. Exhausted, he returned for fresh air, but later descended again with Quartermaster Marshall to access a water tank. They couldn't open the lid, and as George crawled over the hides, he felt himself sinking. When they reached the deck, they collapsed from exhaustion. The cargo had been destroyed by smoke and fire, and the heat on the deck was intolerable. The crew survived on limited rations and caged chickens, using every spare piece of wood, including pigsties, for the pumps. Distressed pigs ran wild in the heat. A raft was constructed, but was too weak for the open sea. Sleep was elusive, and the crew had lost everything, with only hopes of reaching land or meeting another ship. Finally, the Dauntless appeared and sent a lifeboat to the Fiery Star. Captain Moore boarded the Fiery Star on May 12th, and after assessing the situation, he agreed that the crew could do no more. They boarded the Dauntless at 4 p.m., witnessing the Fiery Star succumb to flames by 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow escape.
2 sailors were traveling not far from the infamous Bermuda Triangle when they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails on it were down and the motor wasn't running. One of the men was Matt Rutherford, the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, who has seen a lot during his voyages. But this one was spooky even for him. An awfully abandoned boat that could be hiding scary things inside. Rutherford still decided to approach and inspect the vessel to see if there was someone aboard who needed help. This story happened in 2013, but the sailors waited for 10 years before they published the footage. The ghost ship, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, and it probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. Rutherford was afraid to open doors in cabins, so he carefully searched the boat step by step, and luckily found no people who would need help. The sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound with just sail power until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder, and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. After another 23 days in the Atlantic, they finally reached Bermuda. As it turned out later, the mysterious ghost ship belonged to an Irish Yacht Club member. It got caught in a storm with waves that were 20 feet high and super strong winds, and couldn't continue its voyage. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew, but they had to leave the ship. Rutherford and his crew found the yacht 9 weeks later. Wolfhound is one of more than 50 ships and 20 planes that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle since the mid-19th century. The first ship, at least officially documented, was the USS Pickering. It departed from Delaware to the West Indies in 1800. There were 70 people aboard. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. And perhaps we'll never know what exactly happened to them and where the ship is now. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area is the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. It had tons of dense manganese ore on board, which was used in steelmaking. Something happened during its 9-day voyage when it was passing through the Bermuda Triangle. The last message from Cyclops said, "Weather fair, all well," and then it disappeared forever, without even an SOS signal. Another ship that the Bermuda Triangle supposedly took forever was the Cotopaxi in 1925. It was loaded with coal and had a crew of 32 people on board. Its trip was supposed to go from Charleston, South Carolina to Havana, Cuba, but something went wrong and the ship disappeared. Recently, scientists discovered that the Cotopaxi was lying at the bottom of the ocean about 35 miles from St. Augustine, Florida. Divers who like to go down to the wreck nicknamed this spot the Bear Wreck, but didn't realize they were exploring the remains of the Cotopaxi. One of them, Michael Barnett, was trying to identify the wreck for over 15 years. He carefully measured different parts of the shipwreck that survived underwater with his team. When they compared these measurements with old blueprints of the Cotopaxi, they saw that everything matched up perfectly. The size and position of the boilers were exactly as described in the blueprints. This helped them confirm that they had found the Cotopaxi, and it looks like there was nothing mysterious about its disappearance. It was a combo of bad maintenance, poor care, and rough weather. Many of the hatches used to access the cargo hold where the coal was stored were either broken or missing. This meant that if the ship ran into a storm, water would easily get into the cargo hold, and the ship would get unstable and sink. As the Cotopaxi sailed off the coast of Florida, it met a tropical storm. Just before it disappeared, it sent out a distress call. It was near St. Augustine, so all the puzzle pieces fell into one place. People have come up with all kinds of ideas to explain what might be happening in the Bermuda Triangle. The wildest one is that spaceships from other planets are taking these ships and planes away. Or maybe it has something to do with the lost city of Atlantis, a legendary underwater city. But there are also more rational explanations, such as the fact that this area often has wild and unpredictable weather, with sudden storms and water spouts. For hundreds and hundreds of years, sailors have told stories about giant rogue waves that seem to come out of nowhere in the open ocean. It sounded like a tale in the past, but in the last 20 years, satellites have spotted these freak waves, some of them reaching over 100 feet tall. Storms from the Gulf of Mexico can hit the Bermuda Triangle area and create such rough and unpredictable waves. Scientists built a model of the USS Cyclops and put it in a wave simulator. They say that even a rogue wave 50 feet tall would be enough to flip over that ship. It had a flat bottom and was less stable and more likely to tip. There are also lots of hills and deep valleys on the ocean floor, which can be dangerous if a ship isn't navigating carefully. Sometimes things can go wrong with engines, communication systems, or other equipment. If a plane or ship has a mechanical problem far from land, it can be really hard to get help quickly, especially if rescue teams are far away. The Bermuda Triangle also has magnetic anomalies, so in some parts of it, the compass might point in the wrong direction. And then there are human mistakes, like misjudging distances, making wrong turns, or not listening carefully to directions. This is what happened to Flight 19, a group of planes that went missing. The leader of the flight, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, decided to fly into bad weather without all the equipment they needed. He was also tired, so it was really hard for him to make good decisions. Disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle don't really happen more often than in other parts of the Atlantic Ocean, where a lot of ships and planes travel. They just attract more attention and talks. You still won't find the Bermuda Triangle on any map, and it doesn't have official borders. So we might never be able to solve its mystery because we can't be sure it even exists. But maybe we need to be worried about another Bermuda Triangle, the one up in space. This space triangle doesn't make things completely disappear, but it messes with the equipment on the spacecraft, causing glitches and makes things stop working for a while. The Bermuda Triangle of Space, which is more officially known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, is a unique area above the Earth that stretches over parts of South America and Africa, from Chile all the way to Zimbabwe. It sits right where a part of Earth's magnetic shield is weaker than usual. When a satellite passes through this area, thousands of high-energy particles, especially protons, hit every square inch of it every second. To keep satellites safe from this radiation, space agencies often put them in sleep mode when they pass through the SAA. The Hubble Space Telescope passes through the SAA about 10 times a day and spends about 15% of its time in sleep mode because of this anomaly. Even astronauts on the International Space Station, ISS, which also travels near this zone, have to be careful about radiation. Parts of the ISS, like the kitchen and sleeping areas, have extra shielding to protect them. Ah, cruise ships. Amazing views, exotic destinations. What more could you ask for? While cruising on a megaship is usually super safe, it's good to know some of the secret codes they use on board. One of the scariest things you might hear is Code Red. That means there's a virus running rampant on the ship, and they need to do a serious deep clean. Sick passengers are stuck in their cabins until further notice. But the only announcement that might give you chills is Operation Rising Star, which means a passenger has passed away. On a lighter note, Operation Bright Star, not to be confused with Brightside, refers to a less critical medical emergency. If you hear PVI, that stands for a public vomiting incident. Yep, you heard that right. Some cruise lines have their own versions of this and just yell Purell, Purell, Purell to get the crew moving. There are tons of codes to keep track of, and let's be real, it's hard to remember them all, especially if you're not cruising all the time. So, here's a quick tip. If there's a fire or other emergency, you'll hear a general alarm bell. That means 7 or more short blasts of the ship's whistle, followed by 1 long blast. That's your cue to head to the muster station. Cruise ships are packed with unexpected features that many folks, especially first-timers, might not realize. Some of these floating hotels are massive, almost like small cities. While it's pretty easy to get the hang of all the fun stuff, think water parks, tattoo shops, and tons of dining options, there's also a whole hidden world below the decks that remains a bit of a mystery. So in most cases, there's a morgue, which makes sense as you never know when you hear Operation Rising Star. With millions of passengers cruising every year, it's sadly not uncommon for people to pass away on board. Because of this, many ships are equipped with a morgue and extra body bags just in case. Usually found on the lowest deck, the morgue is a small, stainless steel room that can hold anywhere from 2 to 10 bodies, depending on the ship's size. If someone dies, the ship's staff will alert the authorities back on land. A medical team will check things out and then move the body to the morgue until arrangements can be made. Typically, the body is taken off at the next port, but sometimes it stays on board until the cruise wraps up. Okay, and what if there's a real criminal aboard? Spoiler alert, you won't find any police on a cruise ship, but most of them still have a small jail, often called the brig. If passengers get a bit too rowdy and breach the cruise line's rules, the security team might just lock them up for a while. Yeah, it's not an official jail, it's more like a detention center. Cruise ships are fantastic for socializing, but sometimes you just want a quiet spot to relax and recharge. Luckily, there are plenty of secret hideaways on even the biggest ships where you can find your peace and soak in the views. To start, aim for the forward or aft ends of the ship. These areas are usually less crowded. You'll find cozy deck chairs, hot tubs, and maybe even the space to yourself. Check out the ship's daily schedule to spot activity-free lounges. For instance, the observation lounge might be empty during certain hours, and many ship libraries are perfect for a peaceful nap. On Seabourn, try the aft pool and hot tubs on Deck 5 for serene ocean views. Carnival ships have hidden forward decks where you can enjoy captain-like vistas. Royal Caribbean's Oasis-class ships have a track area at the back where you can relax while watching joggers. Viking's Explorer's Lounge has a quiet second level that's often overlooked. Disney Magic and Wonder have a little-known lookout on Deck 7. While Silversea's Silver Origin features a stargazing platform perfect for night sky watching. Royal Caribbean's helipads and Carnival's Deck 5 Lanai hot tubs are also great gems for some sunshine and tranquility. Now, when you think of pirates, images of Captain Jack Sparrow likely come to mind. Sure, there was media hype around Somali pirates, but are they still a problem? Not exactly. But even so, passengers on cruise ships traveling through high-risk areas near the Horn of Africa can be briefed on what to do if pirates attack. To keep things safe, outdoor activities must be shut down after dark. Cabin lights are better to be dimmed, and passengers are normally told to stay inside their rooms if warned of a potential attack. Despite this, the risk to cruise ships remains low. There's never been a successful attack on one. Anyway, experts admit that it's quite challenging to identify threats in these vast waters. While small pirate boats might be faster, larger cruise ships can usually outrun them and have structural features that resist boarding attempts. Measures like razor wire and fire hoses are among the defenses cruise lines employ to keep passengers safe. Though cruise lines stay tight-lipped about their specific strategies, ensuring passenger safety remains their top priority. Also, when you board your cruise ship, there are some key terms you should know about the layout. The front is called the forward, and the back is the aft. You'll find staterooms on both sides and in between, each with its own perks. Forward staterooms offer fantastic views, letting you enjoy the scenery just like the captain at the bridge as you sail into port. These rooms often have a bit more space thanks to the ship's angled shape. However, keep in mind that they experience more motion from winds and waves, which some cruisers love. While forward verandas are rare and can be windswept, the ocean view staterooms here often feature bigger windows for amazing vistas. On the flip side, aft staterooms provide stunning views of the ship's wake and great sights as you leave port. These rooms also typically have larger verandas, sometimes L-shaped, perfect for relaxing. Many dining options are also found towards the aft, making mealtime convenient. Just know that these rooms can be a bit further from elevators, requiring some extra walking. Don't forget to check the ship's deck plan before booking. If noise is a concern, avoid staterooms near busy areas. And finally, higher decks are usually pricier but offer better views and access to pool decks. Hey, you know how I-95 is one of the most crowded highways in the US? Well, there's also an I-95 on cruise ships, but it's just a hallway. This I-95 is down on Deck 0, and that's where the crew is hustling away under your feet. It's the crew's lifeline, where they do their laundry, hit up the nurse if needed, transfer your luggage, and sneak back into their tiny cabins for a breather. Now, if you romanticize working on a ship, let me try to talk you out of it, especially if you're into food. You won't be treated for leftover stuff. These are just rumors circulating online. It's true that the food isn't as luxurious as for passengers, but it's still quite okay. And if someone from the crew wants to treat themselves to something special, they can make a trip to a grocery store at a port to stock up on their favorite snacks to enjoy in their cabins. Yep, the crew members literally live on a ship. Their rooms are tiny and don't even have windows. Picture a bunk bed crammed into a space where the top bunk is so close to the ceiling, you end up bumping your head every morning. They have a tiny closet and just 2 drawers, which means you can only fit a couple of outfits. And what about bathrooms, you may ask? They're so cramped, you could sit on the toilet, take a shower, and brush your teeth all at the same time if you really wanted to. As for sleep, they don't really sleep at night. Instead, they catch cat naps throughout the day. It's tough to squeeze in a full night's sleep when shifts can last over 12 hours, and any free time usually goes to traveling, eating, or partying. If we're happy enough finding a few bucks we forgot about in our pockets, just imagine stumbling across $13 million in a place you'd never expect. That's exactly what happened to a group of diamond miners working in the Namibian desert. In 2008, they found this incredible treasure inside a shipwreck that happened over 500 years ago, and the story behind this abandoned vessel is packed with mysteries. It all started back in 1533, when the Portuguese built this special trading ship. This model was believed to be a part of a newer class of vessels that were bigger, more efficient, and tougher than the ones that came before. Portugal really needed that, since they were dominating trade all over the seas at the time. So the main purpose of this ship was to support those long-distance expeditions during this super prosperous era. On March 7th, the Portuguese decided to test their impressive new ship, and on that fresh spring day, big vessels sailed down the Tagus River and out into the Atlantic, with flags flying and colorful fabrics draping from their tall masts. Off they went, leaving Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, and heading for Western India. At least, that's what researchers think, since this was a pretty common route for them back then. Most of the time, the Portuguese were after spices. In the early 1500s, it was pretty hard to find things like cinnamon, ginger, cloves, black pepper, and turmeric in Europe, so they had to go to India for them. Unfortunately, one of the ships never made it to its final destination. In fact, to the despair of the Portuguese court, this vessel completely vanished, leaving no sign of a shipwreck. And none of the roughly 300 people on board were ever found. Could they have strayed so far off course that they ended up in the Americas or on some island along the way? Well, anything was possible, and the ship, along with the mystery of its disappearance, became legendary. Fast forward over 500 years to 2008. Diamond miners were doing their thing on a coast near Oranienburg when they started finding some strange stuff while digging, like pieces of metal, wood, and even odd objects that looked like bronze pipes. That was definitely strange, so they called an archaeologist to figure out what was going on. When the archaeologist arrived, he noticed all sorts of strange bits and old pieces scattered around. Little by little, he began to identify those things. First, elephant tusks. Then a 500-year-old artillery piece. All of a sudden, it hit him. This was definitely a shipwreck. But what the archaeologist didn't realize at the time was that this shipwreck turned out to be one of the most significant ever found. Back then, it wasn't easy at all to convince the mining company that archaeologists had to keep exploring the site. But thankfully, they managed to, because on the 6th day of searching, they spotted a treasure. And they literally filled their hats with over a 25-pound mixture of Spanish and Portuguese gold coins. Turns out, this old abandoned ship was loaded with gold, tin, ivory tusks, and over 40,000 pounds of copper ingots when it met its watery and tragic end. In fact, specialists believe that the copper ingots played a key role in keeping the wreck so well preserved. The first reason is kind of obvious. The copper ingots weighing everything down, keeping the shipwreck remnants at the bottom of the ocean. And that was great, as 5 centuries of storms and waves would have washed everything away. But copper ingots were also important for another reason. Fish and other sea creatures might feast on wood, jute sacks, and leather shoes. But copper really ruins their appetite, which means a lot of stuff survived those 500 years at the bottom of the sea that it really shouldn't have. So yeah, against all odds, the treasure was preserved and in excellent condition. The gold looked shiny and intact. While it's impossible to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they had just found the legendary Portuguese vessel, all the evidence points to the fact that, yes, they did. One piece of evidence comes from an old Portuguese book that says that between 1525 and 1600, 21 ships were lost on the way to India, and one of them actually sank somewhere near Namibia, getting lost on the turn of the Cape of Good Hope. Bingo! From that point on, experts have been going over the wreckage, measuring, photographing, and scanning the site millimeter by millimeter with a high-tech 3-dimensional laser scanner. Their goal was to figure out what happened to this ship, or at least get closer to the truth. The first question they had to answer was, why was this ship so close to the coast of Namibia? We're talking about great sailors who probably knew that that stretch of coast was famous for its storms and fog. What happened then? It seems that 4 months or so after its grand departure from Lisbon, the fleet was struck and scattered by a huge storm. So the most likely explanation is that the combination of bad weather and heavy cargo forced the captain to run the ship aground on purpose. According to one theory, he dropped the front anchors and slowly beached the ship. Then it hit an underwater rock in the surf, rolled over in the big waves, and all attempts to free it failed. It began to break apart, starting with the upper structure. At that point, the treasure chest fell out of the captain's cabin and sank down to the seabed. It eventually got crushed and pinned down, but it was also protected by a big piece of the ship's side that broke off when the hull fell apart. Okay, but what about the people on board? Winter storms along the Namibian coast can be brutal, with winds over 80 miles an hour and huge waves, making it nearly impossible to get ashore. But if the storm calmed down at some point, it is possible that the shipwreck had survivors. I mean, some human toe bones were indeed found, suggesting at least one person didn't make it. But these were the only human remains that were recovered. There weren't many personal belongings found either, which leads archaeologists to think that most people on board likely made it to land despite the ship breaking apart. But we can't really say this was a happy ending. Yes, most of them might have survived the shipwreck, but they ended up in one of the harshest places on Earth. An empty stretch of sand and scrub for hundreds of miles. It was winter, so they were cold, wet, and exhausted, with no hope of rescue. Nobody knew they were alive or where to find them. Plus, no ships were likely to pass by, since they were far off the usual routes. Going back to Portugal seemed impossible. After the first round of exploration, researchers found that the ship's remains were scattered across 3 large sections along the coast of Namibia. In the end, more than 40 tons of cargo were recovered from the site, and thousands of different artifacts were found and cataloged, including lead, tin, textiles, and even some astronomical instruments. So, you might be asking, who got the gold? I'll just say that it didn't go to the miners or the archaeologists. According to the researchers involved, every single coin was handed over to the Namibian government. After all, that is the usual procedure for random ships found on the beach. But this case wasn't that simple, as there is an exception to this rule. If the ship found is a state ship, the country that owns it has the right to receive the treasure. In other words, everything they found inside this old abandoned vessel actually belonged to Portugal. No matter that it all happened ages ago. But the Portuguese leaders apparently allowed Namibia to take the lot.
The Nemi ships were massive vessels built by the Romans over 2,000 years ago, complete with marble floors, colorful mosaics, and even plumbing for luxurious baths. Unlike the typical ships of their time, which were mostly used for transport or battles, these were true floating palaces. But the Nemi ships weren't just feats of Roman engineering and luxury. Their story is a wild one. Lost, found, and lost again. These vessels became the focus of a mysterious saga that's puzzled historians for centuries. The first strange thing about them is related to where they were found. These huge wooden ships were lying at the bottom of Lake Nemi, a volcanic lake with still calm waters, located about 19 miles south of Rome. For ages, local fishermen knew about the wrecks, and rumor has it they were taking advantage of that. They'd use grappling hooks to pull up pieces and artifacts from the Nemi ships, selling them at the markets. That went on until 1446, when some noblemen decided enough is enough and started looking into the legends about the Nemi ships. They realized it wasn't just a fish story. Both vessels were actually sitting about 60 feet deep in the lake, and from there, the mystery only grew. When you think about it, 60 feet isn't that deep, and Lake Nemi is pretty small, only 1.1 mile wide and about 100 feet deep. So why build such massive ships in such a small lake? It doesn't really make sense, especially when we find out who built them. The Roman Emperor Caligula. You know, the one known for being one of the cruelest and most unpredictable Roman leaders. But one thing almost everyone can agree on was his impeccable taste for all extravagant things. Caligula spent money like crazy. It's generally assumed that he blew all the imperial treasury in a year on lavish festivals, feasts, and pampering animals. Yep, he supposedly fed his favorite horse oats mixed with gold flakes. Anyway, he loved excess. So again, why did he build two massive ships in such a tiny lake? Experts think Caligula might have built them there because of the lake's connection to Diana, the deity of the hunt, the moon, and nature, who is worshipped at a sanctuary on the northern shore of the lake. By the way, Nemi is a modern name that we see on today's maps. The Romans used to call the lake Speculum Dianae, which means Mirror of Diana. So it is possible that Caligula saw this as the perfect place to hide away and dock his pleasure barges. He wanted extravagant floating palaces, and that's exactly what he got. The Prima Naie, which means first ship in English, was an enormous 230-foot-long vessel. It's almost as big as today's largest passenger aircraft, the Airbus A380. The ship's hull was split into three main sections, with the back wider and the front narrower. It had two big structures at each end, connected by stairs and hallways, giving the ship an odd look, unlike anything else from ancient times. The Seconda Nave, or second ship, was even bigger. It was in deeper water and farther from the shore, making it harder for people to reach it, which also helped preserve it better. The ship was 240 feet long and 79 feet wide, with a kind of building at the back and a smaller one at the front. Even though the front and back structures were missing at the time the ship was discovered, you can still tell they were there from the way the decks were laid out. These ships were absolutely incredible. They were built with the finest materials. Elaborate mosaics made up the stunning floors, bursting with color, and high-grade marble added a touch of elegance and luxury to the interiors. The ships also had 10 banks of oars, baths, galleries, saloons, and even gardens with vines and fruit trees. Yes, gardens, on a boat. Caligula clearly wanted these ships to be his own private paradise. It's said he threw wild parties on board, where his bad behavior knew no limits. This included having scandalous relationships with the wives of his generals and senators. These ships were definitely designed to impress, showing off not only the wealth and power of the emperor, but also the amazing technical skills of Roman engineers. Evidence suggests that the vessels had technologies we thought weren't developed until later. They had advanced plumbing systems, with some sources suggesting they even had running water. There's evidence of bronze pipes and lead drains, which is insane for ships built in the 1st century. Another thing is that wooden beams were covered in lead to keep away shipworms, those tiny mollusks famous for tunneling into and digesting wood. But the engineers' efforts were a bit pointless in this case, since shipworms don't live in fresh water. There's also a theory that one of the ships had a rotating platform. We still don't know its exact purpose, but it may have been used for the revolving presentation of a statue, probably of Diana, or for entertainment purposes, like guests enjoying their meal while slowly spinning and taking in the view. Who knows? All of these findings have led experts to believe the ships were mainly built for recreation or ancient rituals, or maybe both. Basically, the true purpose of the Nemi ships remains a mystery because there is no solid historical documentation talking about it. Now, even though these ships were technological marvels, they didn't last long. They had only been in use for about a year before Caligula's reign ended. Eventually, the ships were damaged, filled with stones, and sunk to the bottom of Lake Nemi. This brings us back to the story of their discovery. In 1446, they confirmed the wrecks were there, but no one could get them out. Then, in 1929, Italy's leaders decided to drain the lake to rescue the ships. So they pumped out 65 feet of water. It took years to get them out of the mud, but the second ship was finally raised in 1932. During the excavation period, archaeologists found a bunch of precious artifacts from the wrecks. Little by little, vast anchors, bronze decorations, and marble statues came up from the depths, along with fancy oar rings, bronze joints, and copper roof tiles. The cost of these ships must have been astronomical. Recovering the memories and artifacts of Roman times was a very important thing at the time, so taking the ships out of that lake was a huge win for Italy. In 1936, they decided to build a museum to showcase the wrecks and let people visit. But their story took a tragic turn. As you probably know, this was a time really messed up by global conflicts, and Italy was no exception. In 1944, a fire broke out at the museum, destroying the ships and all the important archaeological contents. Okay, so we may never know for sure who started the fire, but we do know the largest ancient ships ever discovered were lost in it. Only some bronze pieces, a few charred timbers, and some other artifacts that were stored in Rome survived. But just like a phoenix, the vessels came back from the ashes thanks to a lot of hard work in rebuilding. After the restoration work, the museum in Nemi was reopened in the 1950s. If you ever visit it, maybe you can see a part of a green and red mosaic floor from one of the ships, which, funny enough, got lost at some point and was used as a coffee table in a New York apartment for over 50 years. With all the tragic twists in the Nemi ship story, who knows? Maybe there are still pieces of these floating palaces hidden in different parts of the world.
The moon shines brightly and illuminates the black water of the ocean. Thick fog descends on it in ominous silence. Then, it's suddenly broken by the creaking of wooden boards, followed by a rippling of the waves. Through the fog, you see the outline of an old, large ship. Its hull is rusty, and a strange cold is coming from it. But the most unsettling thing is that there's no one on the deck. The ship sails without a crew. No, this isn't a mythical Flying Dutchman, but a very real ghost ship. September 2nd, 2019. The British Royal Navy's ice patrol ship, called the HMS Protector, sails through the calm waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The time is 11 p.m. Some of the ship's crew are on deck, while others are sleeping in their cabins. The captain steers the ship and looks straight at the horizon. The sky is lit up by an orange twilight, and clouds float in the distance. Suddenly, against this beautiful landscape, one of the sailors notices the black silhouette of an unknown ship. The captain slows down and steers the ship a little closer to the mysterious vessel. This is an old cargo ship, 250 feet long. Attempts to contact the crew members lead to nothing. It seems the unknown boat is floating in the ocean by itself. There's no one on board, at least, no one alive. The deck of the ship creaks from rocking on the waves. The sun sinks below the horizon, and it gets dark. The ship looks terrifying. British sailors don't dare to climb on that strange deck. They take a photo, post it on the internet, and sail away. Many people on the internet will assume the sailors met a real ghost ship. 5 months later, we're in the village of Ballycotton in County Cork, Ireland. A local leaves the house early in the morning to go for a daily run. Music in his headphones, fresh cool air, and a scenic route are ideal conditions for a good workout. The jogger runs along the road on the coast of the Celtic Sea. There was a strong storm last night, and now the sea looks calm. The man runs along the top of a low cliff and notices a huge vessel. An old rusty cargo ship 250 feet long lies on the beach, right among the rocks. No people on board. It seems the ship has been here for ages, but the local is sure this vessel wasn't here yesterday. A little later, it turns out this is the same ship that the sailors from the HMS Protector saw 5 months ago, thousands of miles from this place. The cargo ship, called the Alta, was built in 1976. Nobody knows who used it all this time and for what purposes. It's only known that in 2017, the ship was purchased by a new owner and marked with the flag of Tanzania. It's important to say that almost all cargo ships are equipped with AIS, Automatic Identification System, which is needed to track ship movements in the ocean. Since 2015, something strange started happening with the Alta's AIS. The ship disappeared from the satellites, then reappeared again. Over the past few years, this ship had changed several names and flags. It's not surprising that its AIS shut off and turned on numerous times. It's said that some of those who disable AIS on their ships do so to hide outlaw activities. The ship's captain, whoever it was, clearly didn't want to show the Alta's movements. As AIS showed in 2017, the ship had sailed near Greek port cities. The Alta made 12 stops in 3 such cities in different parts of Greece. Then, the AIS signal disappeared, and 10 months later, the Alta reappeared near the northern coast of Africa, 1,200 miles from Greece. In September of 2018, the ship was sailing about 1,400 miles southeast of Bermuda, and at that time, the crew members started having problems. There were 10 people on board the Alta. On September 19th, the ship's engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The nearest shore was very far away. The ship began to drift. As days passed, the crew couldn't fix the vessel. Food supplies were running low. The crew started to panic and tried to contact someone. The situation got worse as a strong hurricane was approaching the place where the ship broke down. Crew members contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. On October 2nd, a helicopter headed towards the ship. Food and water were unloaded on the Alta. This was enough for the crew to bide their time for several days. About a week later, a rescue boat sailed about 1,500 miles to reach the Alta and help the stranded sailors. Shortly before the start of the hurricane, American rescuers succeeded. The entire crew of the wrecked ship was taken to Puerto Rico. The Alta remained drifting in the ocean. After a while, another ship arrived to tow it to the coast of Guyana. Then, something went wrong, again. The ship was hijacked. Who did it and why remains a mystery to this day. But then, for some unknown reason, the thieves decided to abandon the ship and left it to drift in the ocean. For almost a year, the ship's location couldn't be tracked. Then, in September 2019, the vessel was found by the British Royal Navy. How the Alta was able to cover the distance across the Atlantic and wash up on the coast of Ireland is unknown. An investigation has been launched in Ireland. It's necessary to identify the owner of the vessel and find a responsible person to take on the task of towing it. But no one has since been found. Once, an unknown person called the Irish authorities and introduced themselves as the owner of the ship, but didn't provide any evidence. Several barrels of oil were found on board the Alta. To dismantle the ship, the Irish authorities will need to spend about 10 million euros. Local residents are annoyed by the wreck too. Corroding metal is bad for the environment, and kids have already snuck on board and posted a video on the internet from inside the abandoned ship. The further fate of the Alta remains unresolved. It's still lying there. That ship sailed in the ocean for just 2 years. Now imagine if some other managed to drift for 38. In all that time, no one could catch this ship, and people still seek it. That vessel is called the SS Bechimo. It was a merchant ship owned by a Canadian trading company. In 1931, the ship got stuck in ice off the coast of Alaska. A strong snowstorm began. The team waited a week for it to end, but the storm only intensified. One day, the weather improved a bit, and part of the team was evacuated to the nearest city. Another part of the crew, with the captain, set up camp near the ship. The storm started again and didn't stop for a long time. The blizzard was so heavy that the ship's captain couldn't see beyond his arm's reach. Finally, when the storm was over, the captain saw that the ship simply vanished. He decided the Bechimo sank during the storm. A week later, the ship was found, drifting near the place where it was lost. The hull of the ship was damaged so badly that it was unsafe to sail on it. The captain decided to abandon the ship. However, it didn't sink. For the next 38 years, it was drifting at various points along the Alaskan coast. Several times, people climbed on the ship, including native Alaskan residents and a group of researchers. Attempts to save the vessel from the sea ended in failure. The salvage operations were hampered by drifting ice and bad weather. The last time it was seen was in 1969. The ship was frozen and blocked by the ice. In 2006, the government created a special project to find the Bechimo. However, in all these years, the ship still hasn't been found. Its fate is unknown. It's likely that the ship has finally found peace and is now lying on the seabed of the Chukchi Sea.
Far out in the open sea on a perfectly calm day, a dot appears on the horizon. It grows in size as it gets closer, and soon you can see it's a ship. But when you look at it through the spyglass, chills go down your spine. The vessel is in perfect condition and its cargo is on board, but it's completely devoid of people, drifting listlessly along the current. That was what the captain of the Ellen Austin saw in 1881, and what brought his crew so many sorrows. In December of the previous year, the Ellen Austin, a big 210-foot-long ship, left the port of Liverpool to make its trip to New York. The ship was carrying a load of people hoping to find a better life in the New World. Captain A.J. Griffin took the vessel due southwest for a shorter voyage, and a few weeks into 1881, they found themselves north of the Sargasso Sea, known for its lack of winds and strong circling currents. Ships that got caught in those could lose control and keep on drifting in circles until they were dragged into the center. From there, they'd be incredibly lucky to get back past the currents, but more often than not, they stayed in the desolate desert of the sea forever. Worse still, the area belonged to the notorious Bermuda Triangle, which was already known to take down ships and make them disappear without a trace. The ship's crew were nervous, afraid of being in such a dangerous area so close to a sea that could bring them to a standstill. And ominously, some of the Sargasso Sea's calm must have escaped it, because the Ellen Austin lost its speed one day and fell adrift without the winds. It was fine, though. They had ample provisions and were still on schedule. Captain Griffin was walking around his ship, giving orders in a voice full of calm authority, and both his crew and passengers trusted him completely. But then, the lookout shouted from above that a ship was in sight. And indeed, When the captain looked in the direction the man was pointing, he saw a small schooner moving slowly into view and towards the Ellen Austin. As it came closer, it became apparent that the way the strange vessel moved wasn't right. The captain frowned and examined it through his spyglass. The schooner was untouched, but eerily silent. There wasn't a single soul on board. Derelict ships weren't that rare in the Atlantic at the time, but neither were pirates. Captain Griffin decided to wait and watch. After 2 days, the schooner was as quiet as always, and Captain finally thought it was fine to move in. He took a small team of sailors and boarded the stranded ship. There was nobody there indeed, but luck seemed to be on Griffin's side. The precious cargo of mahogany wood was still in the holds. The captain returned to the Ellen Austin and ordered his select men to take the smaller ship along to New York. The crew's spirits arose with the prospect of riches awaiting them upon arrival. When the winds blew strong again, the Ellen Austin continued its voyage, with the unnamed vessel tagging along. But after a couple of days, the ships were caught in a powerful storm and got separated. The wind, rain,